Hey guys, tonight we begin with something slow, domestic, and quietly transactional. The kind of history that doesn't march or shout, but rustles softly like silk in a gaslit hallway. So dim the lights, adjust whatever pillow situation you've engineered for yourself, and let your brain power down a notch. We're drifting into one of those forgotten corners of the past where nothing explodes, no empires fall on cue, and everyone is mostly just tired, underpaid, and doing their best under some deeply questionable systems. Of course, this is also where history gets weirdly human. We're not starting with a king tonight, not a battle, not even a scandal that made it into official records. This begins in a bedroom with drawers and chemise and the very specific luxury of fabric that does not itch, bite, or smell faintly of damp regret. That alone already tells you something about where you are on the social ladder and where you used to be. The routine is familiar now. The under things go on first, soft cotton and linen, practical but still a small indulgence compared to the rough cloth of seamstress days when everything scraped and nothing forgave. Then comes the corset, the real dividing line between one life and another. You fasten it at the front because it's easier, then turn it around and pull the laces. Not too tight. You are not here to faint dramatically. You need to breathe, to move, to perform, but just enough to coax the fashionable shape out of an ordinary human body. This is not deception exactly, it's collaboration with gravity. Petticoats come next, one after another, adding weight and volume, each layer building toward the final result. The blue dress settles over everything, like the last tier of a carefully assembled cake. There's a quiet satisfaction in this process. Not joy exactly, more like control. The physical sensations help, the corset pressing lightly at the waist, the whisper of petticoats brushing your legs, the cool silk sliding over your arms. These details anchor you. They remind you where you are and who you are supposed to be tonight. Here comes next. The daytime knot comes down. Dark waves brushed until they catch the light. New hairpins finally earn their keep as you twist and arrange something more elaborate. Not a masterpiece. No lady's maid hovering to perfect it, but neat, flattering, curls softening the face, the rest secured at the back where it will behave itself. Cosmetics are minimal, that's the rule. Just enough rice powder to even things out. A touch of rouge carefully blended so no one can accuse you of trying too hard. The goal is not transformation, it's enhancement. You, but slightly improved. A version that looks well rested, well fed, and unburdened by 16-hour workdays and bad lighting. Then scent, lavender, water, not perfume, that would be vulgar. Wrists behind the ears, the hollow of the throat. It warms with your skin and floats just enough to suggest cleanliness, calm, and the absence of any inconvenient realities from earlier in the day. You step back and look in the mirror. The working woman is gone, not replaced by a lady. That would be a stretch. But something adjacent, a woman designed to be pleasant to look at, interesting to speak to, and worth the asking price. The clock strikes 5:30. Dinner. Downstairs, the silk rustles differently on the steps. The extra weight changes how you move. Back straighter, step slower, even posture becomes part of the job. The dining room feels formal simply by not being the kitchen. Clean linen, decent cutlery. Mrs. Cartwright presides at the head of the table in dark purple silk, which somehow manages to look both respectable and faintly intimidating. Her presence alone raises standards. No one slouches, no one rushes. The food is plain and generous. Beef stew, bread still warm, rice pudding with raisins. It's the kind of meal meant to fortify rather than delight. Wine is poured, one glass, that's it. Enough to soften the edges without blurring anything important. Conversation moves easily, half planning, half gossip. Who's expected? Who hasn't been seen? Which gentleman might wander in flush with payday optimism? The men become recurring characters, their habits and preferences shared knowledge. Mrs. Cartwright mostly listens. Occasionally, she corrects something or adds a detail that reminds everyone she knows more than she says. She occupies a strange space: employer, guardian, disciplinarian, mentor. She keeps her distance, but she is not cruel. That alone sets her apart from many. When dinner ends, she gives the usual reminder: quality over quantity, decorum above all. This house survives on reputation. The plates are cleared. She leaves for her office. The girls linger a moment longer, savoring the last stretch of unclaimed time. You finish your wine slowly. The room is warm. The chair supports you. The quiet feels earned. Eventually, everyone disperses upstairs, to parlors, to kitchens. You sit just a moment longer, letting stillness settle before standing again. The parlor has been prepared, curtains drawn, gas lamps adjusted, fire crackling just enough to chase away London's eternal damp. A decanter of cherry waits alongside sugared almonds and biscuits, meant to imply generosity. Sarah is already there, dressed in burgundy silk that knows exactly what it's doing. She compliments the blue dress. You accept. It's professional courtesy. Early yet, she says. The night will pick up later. It always does. Conversation drifts to shops, coughs, deliveries, normal household concerns layered over abnormal work. Gradually, the others arrive: green silk, emerald. Josephine, strictly observing only. Tea is served in proper china because presentation matters even when the contents ordinary. You cradle the cup. The ritual steadies you. The clock strikes 8. The knock comes. Mrs. Cartwright summons Emily. Business conducted elsewhere. Money handled discreetly. Fictions preserved. The energy shifts. This is no longer waiting. This work. Another knock. Sarah's turn. Then quiet. Speculation. Lily mentions a new gentleman, wealthy, recommended, special, sherry. This matters. Some men want bodies. Some want audiences. Some want reassurance that their lives mean something. You file the information away. Your name is called. You rise, smooth the skirt, move into the hallway. The gentleman waiting is new, well dressed, not flashy, the kind of man who expects doors to open for him. Mrs. Cartwright handles introductions. You curtsy, hand offered. He assesses, but without hunger. That's promising. He follows her into the office. You wait. When he returns, the message is clear, conversation included. You pour the cherry, fingers brush, eye contact holds. The dance begins. Weather, music, traffic. You let him feel clever without challenging him. When the glass is empty, you suggest upstairs. He agrees. Your room is ready. Fire low. Linens fresh. Flowers extravagant but effective. Light softened to forgive everyone. Mr. Hamilton approves. You close the door. The rest follows the familiar pattern: talking, touching, unspoken negotiations carried out politely and without drama. He is considerate. This matters more than it should. When it's over, he lingers. He asks questions. Not cruel, not prying, just curious. You tell him the truth, or close enough. Seamstress, work, long hours, bad pay. This is better. He listens. That alone sets him apart. He listens in the way men rarely do, not with interruption or correction, but with a quiet stillness that suggests the effort of imagining another life. This is flattering in its own muted way. You finish the explanation without embellishment. No tragic swoon, no moral sermon, just economics and fatigue and the slow narrowing of options. He nods, as if this aligns neatly with something he already suspected about the world. He doesn't apologize. That would be awkward. He doesn't offer rescue. That would be insulting. Instead, he lies there a moment longer, breathing evenly, then eventually disentangles himself with the careful politeness of someone used to exiting rooms without disturbing their arrangement. He dresses behind the screen. You sit up and smooth the sheets out of habit. The work continues even when the transaction is technically complete. When he leaves, there's the faint smell of cologne and extinguished gas, and the room settles back into stillness like a held breath finally released. You straighten things quickly, not obsessively, just enough to reset the space for the next use. Then you adjust your dress, check your hair, and return downstairs. The parlor hums now, not loudly, but with that low current of occupied time. Men come and go. Names are exchanged or forgotten. Sarah returns first, expression neutral, already recalculating the night's rhythm. Lily is called next. Emily descends later, slightly flushed, but composed. The teacups are cleared and replaced with glasses. The fire is fed. The clock keeps doing what clocks do, marking progress without commentary. There are gaps in the evening, small pauses where no one is needed, and conversation resumes in fragments. These are the moments that feel strangest when you're technically at work but briefly unnecessary. You sit carefully, posture maintained, because habits do not switch off easily. Someone mentions a concert. Someone else complains about damp creeping into the back rooms again. It's mundane talk wrapped around a very specific kind of labor. Another client requests you. Not Mr. Hamilton again. Someone older. This one prefers quiet. You oblige. This encounter is shorter, less conversational, more mechanical, but not unpleasant. It ends cleanly. You return to the parlor with practiced composure. This is the real skill, not what happens upstairs, but how convincingly you re enter the shared space afterward, as if nothing has shifted inside you. Mrs. Cartwright passes through occasionally, checking details, adjusting schedules, ensuring glasses are refilled and boundaries respected. She runs the house like a careful experiment, balancing comfort and control. Her rules are clear enough that no one needs reminding very often. She understands that predictability is a form of safety. As the night deepens, the energy softens, men tire, paydays lose their shine, conversations stretch longer because no one is rushing toward novelty anymore. Some clients linger in the parlor just to talk. This is where the job becomes something closer to emotional janitorial work, listening to regrets that never make it into diaries, nodding at stories that have been rehearsed many times before. You provide attention without expectation, interest without consequence. It is exhausting in a way that leaves no visible mark. Near midnight, the flow slows. There are fewer knocks now. When the last client leaves, there is a collective exhale that no one comments on. Glasses are gathered, lamps lowered, the fire allowed to die down. Mrs. Cartwright dismisses everyone with a nod. There is no speech, no congratulations. This was a successful night. That's enough. Upstairs again, you shed the dress layer by layer. Petticoats first, then the corset loosened carefully. because rushing only leads to bruises. The relief is subtle but real. You rub your waist absent mindedly as circulation returns. The chemise feels suddenly luxurious, again, simply because it asks nothing of you. Hair comes down, pins collected, cosmetics wiped away. The lavender scent fades, leaving only skin and fatigue. You sit on the edge of the bed for a moment before lying down. This is another pause, mirroring the one before dinner, but different in texture. The house is quieter now, settled. No anticipation left, only aftermath. Your body registers the day in small complaints, a shoulder tight, a calf sore from controlled movement, but nothing dramatic. You breathe steadily and let the mattress take your weight. Sleep comes easily. Not because the work is easy, but because exhaustion is democratic. It claims everyone eventually. Days like this repeat. They blur into one another with minor variations. A different dress, a different man, a different conversation that leads to the same polite conclusion. Over time, the routines become comforting in their predictability. You learn where effort matters and where it can be conserved. You learn which parts of yourself must remain accessible and which must be quietly locked away. Outside this house, the city continues unaware. Carts rattle, pubs close, laundry is hung, seamstresses bend over bad light and bleeding fingers. You think of that sometimes, not with longing, but with a distant recognition of paths not taken. This life is not freedom, but it is survivable. And survival, as history so often demonstrates, is an achievement rarely romanticized, but always necessary. Morning will come. There will be bread and tea and sunlight filtered through soot streaked windows. There will be laughter that is not required and silence that does not need to be filled. For now, there is only rest and the knowledge that tonight, like so many others, has passed without catastrophe, which quietly is its own kind of success. Morning arrives without ceremony. It always does. Light seeps through curtains that have seen better decades. The house exhales itself awake slowly. No bells, no shouting, just footsteps and kettles and the faint clink of crockery somewhere below. You wake with that brief, disorienting pause where the body remembers before the mind does. Then it settles. The room is cool, the fire long dead. You stretch carefully because yesterday still lives in the muscles. Downstairs, breakfast is simple: bread, tea, butter if cook is feeling generous. The girls drift in at different times, hair loose, faces unarranged. This is the only hour when no one is required to be anything in particular. Conversation is softer now, less curated. Someone yawns without apology. Someone complains about the crick in her neck. No one mentions the men from the night before. They belong to a different shift, a different version of everyone involved. Mrs. Cartwright appears briefly, already in working mode. She reviews numbers quietly, notes taken, accounts balanced. There is no praise, but there is also no criticism. That's approval in her language. She reminds Josephine to rest. She assigns light chores. She disappears again into her office. This house runs on quiet competence, not affection, not cruelty, just systems. Later, you return to your room. The blue dress is hung carefully. It will be worn again soon. Fabric like that is an investment. Under things are aired, hairpins collected and stored. The routine of maintenance begins. This is another part. History rarely lingers on. The constant care required to keep people presentable enough to sell respectability by the hour. By midday, the house feels almost ordinary. Windows open slightly to chase out last night's smoke. The parlor looks like any other parlor. Decanters cleaned, biscuits replaced. The transformation back into normalcy is thorough and deliberate. No evidence left behind, no stories clinging to the furniture. If you step outside briefly, the city doesn't notice you. Crowds never do. You pass shop windows full of things you can now afford but don't quite want. The seamstress inside bends over her work and doesn't look up. You recognize the posture immediately. That ache lives in the memory longer than it should. You keep walking. Afternoons are the quietest. This is when time stretches. It's when thoughts wander if you let them. You occupy yourself with mending, with reading scraps of old newspapers, with small conversations that go nowhere particular. Someone practices her letters, someone else naps. You learn to value these empty hours. They are rare pockets where nothing is demanded. Historically, this is the part that gets erased. When people talk about houses like this, they skip straight to the night. They forget the long daylight hours spent waiting. They forget that labor is not constant motion, but readiness. The ability to switch personas on command. The discipline of restraint. This is not decadence, it's logistics. Evening creeps back eventually. It always does. The cycle restarts. The same layering of clothing, the same controlled reshaping of bodies to suit a fashion that will eventually move on and leave everyone scrambling. The same quiet satisfaction in the process because it is one of the few things you control completely. Dinner will be served again. There will be stew or something like it. There will be wine measured carefully. Conversation will circle familiar topics with slight variations. A new gentleman, a missing regular, a rumor that never resolves. The clock will strike. The door will knock. The house will shift. And somewhere far above all of this, history will later compress it into a single sentence or ignore it entirely because it doesn't fit neatly into triumph or tragedy. It's just people adapting, choosing the least punishing option available. And if that sounds unromantic, well, so is survival most days. For now, the routine continues smooth, steady, unremarkable. And in a strange way, that's what makes it bearable. The predictability, the absence of surprise, the knowledge that tonight will resemble last night closely enough that nothing truly new can hurt. You, so you breathe, you straighten your shoulders, you let the silk settle, and you move forward into another evening that will pass quietly like all the others. The house breathes in again as dusk approaches. It's a subtle thing. You learn to sense it before the lamps are lit, before dresses are chosen, before voices adjust themselves. The air tightens just slightly, not with fear, with readiness. This is a place that understands timing better than most people understand themselves. You sit near the window for a while, watching the street shift from practical to performative. Shopkeepers close shutters, working men loosen collars, cabs pass more frequently now, everyone moving towards some version of evening. You are already where you need to be. That fact brings a quiet, private satisfaction. Getting ready is not rushed. It never is. That's the illusion guests believe, that you sprang into existence moments before they arrived. In truth, the process is slow and methodical. You wash carefully, hair brushed and rebrushed until it behaves, or at least pretends to. You choose a dress not for beauty but for utility. This one photographs well in memory. This one forgives fatigue. This one distracts from the shadows beneath your eyes. Costumes for endurance rather than fantasy. Corsets go on with practiced movements. You no longer resent them. They are tools now, not symbols, not punishments, just equipment. You lace yourself into the role the house requires and feel the mental shift settle alongside the physical one, a small tightening of the spine, a smoothing of expression. You could do this half asleep. And sometimes you nearly are. Downstairs, the parlor fills slowly. Mrs. Cartwright positions herself like a general before battle. She notices everything. She says very little. The girls gather in ways that look casual, but are carefully chosen. You sit where the light hits just right, not too bright, not too dim. There's an art to being visible without being examined. The first guest arrives alone. They often do early in the evening. He smells faintly of ink and damp wool. He talks more than necessary. He apologizes too often. You listen. You smile. You guide him gently through the ritual that makes him feel interesting. Again, when he leaves, he looks lighter. That's the product. That's the exchange. No mystery. Later, another arrives, confident, loud. The sort who believes money grants immunity from awkwardness. It doesn't. You manage him anyway. You always do. That's another unspoken skill. The ability to redirect without confrontation, to maintain dignity for both parties, even when only one deserves it. History likes to pretend this was glamour, it was negotiation. Time moves strangely during these hours. Not fast, not slow. It stretches and compresses depending on who occupies the space. You learn to measure it by footsteps on stairs, by the creak of certain floorboards, by the rhythm of the clock that everyone pretends not to hear. When it chimes, you feel it more than you register it. Between encounters, you return to stillness again. That practiced breathing, that grounding moment. Feet on floor, hands steady. This is where survival lives, not in the transactions, but in the pauses between them, where you remember that your body belongs to you even when your time does not. Conversations repeat themselves across weeks and months. Different mouths, same sentences. Astonishing how many men believe their thoughts are unprecedented. You respond as if they are, because that's the job, to make novelty out of repetition, to make attention feel personal even when it's professional. This skill would serve you well anywhere, but society rarely rewards women for transferable expertise. Near midnight, the house grows louder. This is the hour of bravado. The men who have been drinking elsewhere, the ones who arrive, already convinced of their own charm, they laugh too loudly, they gesture too broadly, they forget names immediately. You remember anyway, names are leverage, names are armor. You escort one upstairs who smells of cigar smoke and regret. He talks about politics as if no one has ever disagreed with him. You nod at appropriate intervals. He mistakes this for admiration. This happens often. You let him believe it. It makes things simpler. Afterward, you sit on the edge of the bed for a moment longer than usual. Not from emotion, from fatigue. There's a difference. And learning it saves you years of unnecessary self examination. You wash, you reset, you restore the room to neutrality. No trace, no story lingering. Back downstairs, the fire burns lower now, the air heavier. The girls exchange glances that communicate entire essays. No words needed. Someone rubs her wrist absent mindedly. Someone else fixes a loose pin for her without being asked. This is community, not sentimental, not performative, but real. Food appears again, simple sustenance. It tastes better than it should. You eat because you must, because tomorrow exists, and the day after that, and the body keeps accounts whether you want it to or not. There's talk of weather, of business, of a rumor that never quite resolves. These conversations anchor you. They remind you that the world continues beyond individual encounters, that this house is not a vacuum but a node in a much larger system of want and money and denial. Eventually, the night thins. Customers leave more slowly now, lingering by the door, adjusting coats unnecessarily. They don't want to step back into themselves just yet. You understand that feeling better than they ever will. When the last one goes, the silence feels earned, not dramatic, just deep. Mrs. Cartwright closes her book. She nods. That's it. That's the signal. No applause, no speeches. Work concluded. Upstairs again, the private staircase, the familiar ache in your legs, the knowledge that sleep is close. The room welcomes you without expectation. No one here needs you to be pleasant or interesting or accommodating. You undress with relief that borders on reverence. Corset first, then dress, then the careful undoing of the day. Lily is already there. She doesn't look up at first. She knows it's you. She always does. This room has witnessed more honesty than most marriages. You exchange the kind of conversation that happens only when exhaustion has stripped away unnecessary detail. Short sentences, real ones. You talk briefly about nothing, then about everything, then about plans that may or may not materialize. It doesn't matter. The talking itself is the point, a reminder that your voice exists beyond performance. The lamp is extinguished. The beds creak softly as you settle. The storm outside returns, or maybe never left. You stop trying to track it. Your body sinks into rest with practiced efficiency. This too is a skill, the ability to sleep when opportunity allows, to claim rest without guilt. Thoughts drift. They always do. You consider the strange balance of this life, the autonomy, the cost, the clarity, the compromise. History will flatten it later. It always does. But tonight, it's intact, complex, understood by the only person who needs to understand it. You. Breathing slows, muscles release, the world narrows to fabric and warmth and the steady rhythm of another person sleeping nearby. That sound is strangely comforting. It proves continuity. It proves tomorrow. And as consciousness loosens, you don't think of escape or redemption or grand endings. You think of rest, and that is enough for now. The night holds, the house stands, the routine waits patiently to begin again. Morning comes again, not announced, just implied by the light changing its mind about the curtains. You wake before the sound of the house does, that brief stretch where the world hasn't asked anything yet. You stay there for a moment, eyes open, breathing steady. This is yours. No one can invoice it. Lily stirs eventually. She always does a few minutes after you. Habits sink when lives overlap long enough. She sits up, already reaching for the brush. The same slow strokes, the same quiet rhythm. You don't comment on it. She doesn't comment on you. Watching. These are small agreements made long ago without words. Downstairs, the kettle begins its daily argument with the stove. The smell of tea arrives before the sound of cups. The house resets itself with practiced indifference to yesterday's emotional residue. That's one of its talents. It remembers money. It forgets everything else. Breakfast is taken standing sometimes, seated if the chairs are free. No ceremony. The bread is a little stale today. You eat it anyway. Hunger is not picky. The girls appear one by one, eyes clearer than they were hours ago. Laughter softer, movements economical, everyone conserving energy without admitting it. There's talk of laundry schedules, of a missing glove, of whether the butcher has raised his prices again. These details matter. They anchor you. They remind you that this is still a household, not just a business, not just a rumor. Mrs. Cartwright passes through like a shadow that pays taxes. She scans the room, counts heads, counts cups. She says good morning in a way that is technically polite. She leaves again. This is management by presence. She doesn't need to explain authority. She simply occupies it. After breakfast, the day opens up in that strange way when nothing urgent exists, but everything still needs doing. You mend, you polish, you reorganize drawers that will be disrupted again tonight. This is maintenance as meditation. Hands busy, mind drifting just enough not to spiral. At some point, you step outside again. The air smells like damp stone and coal smoke. London doesn't soften for anyone, it just keeps happening. You walk a few streets over, not for errands, just movement. The city accepts you without comment. You are invisible in the most peaceful way. You pass a church, a school, a shop selling hats you would never wear. They are designed for a life that requires pretending you don't sweat. You keep walking. By afternoon, the house settles into its quietest stretch. This is when fatigue sneaks up if you're careless. You sit near the window again, light thinner now. You read a page of something you've already read twice. It doesn't matter. The words are just there to occupy the mind while the body rests. This is also when memory tends to wander. It's dangerous if you let it linger too long. You think of other rooms, other houses, other versions of yourself that existed briefly and then disappeared. You don't romanticize them. You've learned better, but you acknowledge them. That's different. That's allowed. Someone laughs upstairs. A quick sound, cut off just as quickly. You don't investigate. Everyone processes differently. You respect the silence that follows. As evening approaches, the transformation begins again, like clockwork, like ritual, like muscle memory. The lamps are lit, the mirrors cleaned, the dresses chosen with quiet deliberation. You notice how everyone's posture shifts without instruction. Shoulders back, chins lifted. The performance warms up backstage. You choose a dress that has learned your body well. It doesn't argue. It doesn't demand adjustments every 5 minutes. This is luxury of a practical kind. You step into it and feel the familiar alignment happen, the mental brace clicking into place. Corset, lacing, breath adjusted, not restricted, just redirected. You check yourself in the mirror, not critically, not kindly, just factually, presentable, capable. Downstairs, the parlor waits. It always looks better at night. The light forgives more then. The furniture becomes generous instead of worn. The glasses sparkle just enough to suggest prosperity rather than effort. Guests begin arriving, a slow trickle at first, then faster. You register faces, names, occupations. Some you recognize, some you don't. You don't dwell on either category. Familiarity does not guarantee ease. Newness does not guarantee difficulty. You spend time with a man who talks about railways as if they are a personal accomplishment. You let him. He needs the illusion. You provide it efficiently. He leaves satisfied. This is considered success by all measurable standards. Another guest stays longer, asks more questions, listens in a way that almost feels genuine. You don't mistake it for anything more than curiosity. That boundary is reinforced gently but firmly. You have survived by keeping those walls flexible but intact. Between customers, you sit quietly, hands folded, breath slow. This stillness is as much a part of the job as anything else. It communicates availability without desperation. It's a skill learned through repetition and observation, not instinct, not luck. The night deepens, the house fills, the noise rises, then levels out. You move through it like someone navigating a familiar landscape in low light. No panic, no rush. You know where the obstacles are. At some point, you catch your reflection unexpectedly, not in a mirror, in the darkened window. You look older than you did this morning, not dramatically, just honestly. Time marks itself in subtle ways. You acknowledge it, then let it go. There's no benefit in arguing with chronology. Later, the kitchen hosts another brief gathering. Food again. Simple, heavy enough to ground you. The tea does its job. You drink it slowly. Conversation minimal. No one has energy for embellishment. Now, that's fine. The call comes again. Another group. Another negotiation. Downstairs, voices louder tonight. You take your place automatically. Your smile arrives on time. This punctuality is one of your strengths. You pair off. You ascend. You perform. The encounter is forgettable. That's not a criticism. Forgettable is safe. Forgettable means no aftermath lingering longer than it should. When it ends, you rest briefly, not indulgently, just enough. You restore the room. The routine carries you through even when the mind is tired. This is the body remembering what to do when thought is inefficient. Hours pass. The house thins again. The storm outside returns or continues. You've stopped checking. You trust it to be there without your supervision. Finally, the end is called. Not announced, just understood. The accounts are closed. The doors secured. The energy shifts unmistakably. Work releases its grip. Upstairs, the private room waits. Lily is there again, always constant in a world built on temporary arrangements. You exchange tired smiles, the kind that require no explanation. Undressing feels better every time. The corset loosens, the dress slides away, the weight lifts. You breathe fully again. This never gets old. No matter how many nights repeat, this moment retains its pleasure. You speak quietly, about nothing specific, about everything implied, plans that may change, weather that probably will. These conversations matter because they don't have an audience. They don't need to resolve. The lamp goes out. Darkness settles gently. The storm hums outside like a distant engine. You sink into bed with the practiced gratitude of someone who understands the value of rest. Thoughts drift again. They always do. You consider the strange stability of repetition, how routine can be both a cage and a shelter, how predictability dulls pain but also ambition. You don't resolve this. You don't need to. Sleep doesn't require conclusions. Your breathing slows, the body lets go, the mattress accepts your weight without comment. This is the closest thing to unconditional acceptance you encounter most days, and that's enough. Tomorrow will come again. It always does. But for now, the night holds. You rest. You drift. The world can wait. Sleep loosens its grip slowly. It never rushes you awake. That would be rude. You surface in stages. First the awareness of weight, then sound, then light filtering through fabric that has learned this routine as well as you have. The storm has moved on during the night, leaving behind a cleaner kind of quiet, the sort that feels earned. You lie still for a moment longer than necessary. This pause is strategic. It lets the body check itself, take inventory, ask which parts will complain today. The answer is predictable. Shoulders, hips, feet. You accept this without drama. There are worse negotiations to conduct. Lily shifts in her bed. She mutters something incoherent. That's as close to morning conversation as either of you gets before tea. You sit up carefully. Swing your legs over the side. The floor is cold. This is not new. This is tradition. The washstand waits. It always does. Basin, water, soap. The mirror reflects a version of you that feels unfinished, undecided. You splash water on your face and watch it sharpen. The image firms up. Not prettier, not younger, just awake. Downstairs, the house begins its low hum again. It never truly sleeps. It just changes volume. The kettle resumes its argument. The stairs creak in familiar patterns. Someone coughs once, then again. These sounds are oddly comforting. They confirm continuity. Breakfast arrives without ceremony. You take your cup of tea exactly the way you always do. No sugar today. You're not sure why. Small changes happen without permission sometimes. You let it go. The bread is fresher than yesterday. You notice. You don't comment. Conversation is minimal this morning, not tense, just sparse. Everyone is conserving something: energy, patience, attention. You don't need to name which. You all understand the economy of restraint. Mrs. Cartwright appears briefly. She notes something in her book. She nods once. That nod means the house survived another night. This is success by her metric. She leaves again. Management concluded. The morning stretches out in that peculiar way where time feels both abundant and slippery. You attend to small tasks: mending a seam, replacing a pin that bent beyond usefulness. These acts ground you. They provide evidence that effort leads to visible outcome. Not everything in life offers that reassurance. At some point, you sit near the window again. It's becoming a habit. The street looks ordinary now. Children pass by with messages. Old men argue quietly over nothing in particular. A delivery cart rattles past. You exist adjacent to all of it, unremarkable, unnoticed. This anonymity feels like a luxury. You think briefly about how history will later compress lives like yours into footnotes, or worse, moral lessons, stripped of context, sanded smooth until only judgment remains. You don't resent this. You just find it inaccurate. History is rarely interested in maintenance work. Afternoon arrives without enthusiasm. It rarely has any. You occupied with reading again. The same pages, the same lines. They don't need to surprise you. That's not their job. Someone laughs upstairs, a different laugh than yesterday. You clock it subconsciously. You always do. These details accumulate whether you want them to or not. As the light shifts again, the familiar preparation begins. There's comfort in its inevitability. The body responds before the mind finishes acknowledging the cue. You rise, you move, you select clothing with practiced efficiency. This decision making has been streamlined over time. You save energy wherever possible. The dress today is darker, more forgiving. The fabric knows how to behave. You appreciate that. You step into it and feel the alignment happen. The persona settling into place like a coat that fits because it has been worn too often to argue corset, lace, breath adjusted again. You don't fight it, you work with it. This cooperation is what keeps things tolerable. Downstairs, the parlor is reset. It always is. No evidence of yesterday, no residue, no lingering warmth. The room exists in perpetual readiness. This neutrality is intentional. It allows anyone to imagine themselves as the first. The evening begins quietly. A single guest, then another. You adapt without effort. This rhythm is embedded now. You listen, you respond, you guide, you redirect. It's not deception, It's facilitation. One man speaks nervously. You soothe him without condescension. Another boasts. You contain him without challenge. Each interaction is a minor problem solving exercise. This is work that requires emotional literacy, not the kind anyone acknowledges. Between visits, you rest in stillness again, hands folded, eyes soft, breath slow. This pause is as essential as anything else. It keeps you intact. Later, the house fills more densely tonight. The noise level rises, then stabilizes. You navigate it easily. You've learned how to move through crowded emotional spaces without absorbing everything. A familiar face appears. You note it. You don't react. Familiarity is not intimacy. This distinction has saved you repeatedly. The hours continue, layered, repetitive, not unpleasant, not exciting. They don't need to be either. This is endurance work, not spectacle. At some point, you realize you are tired in a deeper way. Not sharp, not acute, just cumulative. You adjust accordingly. You pace yourself. This is another skill. You don't burn everything at once. You ration. Food appears again. You eat because it's there. You drink tea because it helps. You don't overthink this. The body has needs. They are not philosophical. The night thins eventually. It always does. Voices drop. The parlor empties slowly. Customers linger in the doorway again, reluctant to rejoin themselves. You let them go anyway. You can't carry them with you. That way lies exhaustion. When the signal comes, the release is immediate, not dramatic, just definitive. Work ends. You feel it in your shoulders first, then your jaw. Upstairs again, the familiar climb, the private room. Lily already there again. She looks as tired as you feel. That symmetry is comforting. You undress with relief. The garments relinquish their hold one by one. The corset last. You breathe fully again. This breath never loses its significance. It marks the boundary between public and private more clearly than any locked door. You talk quietly about the day, about nothing, about small plans that may or may not happen. This conversation is loose, not goal oriented. That's what makes it restful. The lamp is extinguished. Darkness settles without resistance. Outside, the city continues its endless murmur. You let it exist without your participation. In bed, the mattress receives you kindly. You adjust until everything aligns. That small satisfaction is disproportionately powerful. It tells the body it's safe to stop. Thoughts drift again. They always do. You consider how stability can be built from repetition, how identity can survive performance if boundaries are maintained. You don't resolve this. Sleep doesn't require answers. Breathing slows, muscles release, the day recedes. You float in that in between space again, where awareness softens and edges blur. The storm is gone, the house is quiet, the routine waits patiently for morning. For now, you rest, and that is enough. The rhythm holds. It always does. You wake again before the house fully remembers itself, that narrow window where the world feels negotiable. You lie still, listening to the soft confirmations of life continuing, someone turning in their sleep, a distant cart on the street, the faint settling noise of a building that has stood through worse nights than this. Your body performs its quiet audit. The familiar aches report in. You acknowledge them without comment. They are part of the arrangement now. You sit up slowly, not because you must, but because you've learned patience saves energy later. The floor is cold again. It will always be cold. You accept this as fact rather than inconvenience. Lily breathes evenly for a few moments longer before waking. She stretches without opening her eyes, muscle memory guiding her as reliably as yours. You both exist in parallel routines that rarely require coordination. This coexistence is efficient, not intimate in the romantic sense, but deeply cooperative. The washstand offers its plain utility. You wash your face. The water is brisk today. You welcome it. It sharpens the edges of awareness without demanding enthusiasm. The mirror reflects someone functional. That's enough. You don't need to admire or criticize. Just recognize. Downstairs, the day assembles itself. Kettle first, then cups, then footsteps converging from different directions. The house doesn't rush, it understands sequence. This understanding is what keeps it profitable and standing. Breakfast is taken with minimal commentary. Someone mentions a delivery delay. Someone else responds with a shrug. These are not problems worth emotional investment. You eat, you drink, you allow the warmth of tea to settle where it's needed most. Mrs. Cartwright appears briefly as usual. She notes something. She observes everything. She says nothing that requires response. This is how she conserves authority, by not spending it unnecessarily. She moves on. The house adjusts around her absence without pause. The morning opens up, the long stretch of light before evening claims its territory. You occupy it with care tasks, mending, airing fabrics, polishing things that will be touched by strangers later. This work, invisible by design. If done correctly, no one notices it existed at all. You pause occasionally, not because you're tired yet, but because pacing is another form of discipline. You sit by the window again. The street offers its daily procession. You watch without attachment. This is observation without longing. You've learned the difference. Thoughts drift. They always do. You consider how many lives operate on repetition like this, how stability is built from predictable motions rather than grand gestures. This thought doesn't depress you, it steadies you. Afternoon arrives gradually. The light shifts, the air cools slightly. You read again, the same pages, the same words. They are familiar enough to feel like furniture rather than information. This suits you. Someone hums upstairs, a tune without lyrics. It floats briefly, then disappears. You don't comment. You respect the temporary nature of comfort. As evening approaches, the house subtly tightens again. You feel it before you see it, the quiet readiness, the collective straightening of posture. You rise without instruction. The preparation begins. Clothing is selected with practical wisdom. The dress today is dependable. It doesn't demand attention. It performs well under scrutiny. You appreciate that more than beauty. You step into it and feel the alignment occur. The persona settling into place like a well trained muscle. Corset, lace, breath adjusted once more. You move with the efficiency of someone who no longer negotiates with inevitability. You make it work for you instead. Downstairs, the parlor waits. Lamps lit just enough to soften edges. Furniture arranged to suggest intimacy without commitment. The illusion is precise. You take your place where visibility meets control. Guests arrive steadily tonight. No rush, no gaps. You transition smoothly between interactions. You listen, you respond, you redirect. This is social choreography practiced to the point of invisibility. One man speaks of business failures as if confessing absolves him. You offer understanding without solutions. He doesn't want solutions. He wants temporary relief. You provide it competently. Another arrives already convinced of his own importance. You manage him gently. You let him believe the evening revolves around his presence. This belief costs you nothing and gains you peace. Between encounters, you pause again, hands folded, breath slow. This stillness protects you from accumulation. It allows experiences to pass through rather than settle. The house hums at full capacity now, voices overlapping, laughter punctuating the air. You navigate it with practiced calm. You know where to stand, where not to linger, when to move. This knowledge keeps things smooth. Hours layer themselves one atop another. Not dramatic, not dull, just steady. You feel the familiar deepening fatigue, but it remains manageable. You pace, you ration energy. You have learned that endurance outlasts intensity every time. Food appears again. You eat because it's there. You drink tea because it helps. These choices require no reflection, they are maintenance. Later, the flow slows. Customers thin. The noise recedes gradually. The parlor empties in stages. You guide the last few toward the door. They linger as usual. You allow them their moment. Then you let them go. You cannot carry them beyond the threshold. When the work releases its hold, you feel it immediately. The shift is physical. Shoulders drop, jaw unclenches, breath deepens. You don't celebrate. You simply acknowledge completion. Upstairs, the private room receives you. Lily is already there again. The constancy of her presence never fails to soothe. You exchange tired glances that say everything necessary without words. Undressing is relief in layers. Each garment relinquished returns something to you: mobility, breath, space. The corset lasts. You inhale fully. This breath remains sacred. No matter how many times repeats, it never loses significance. You speak quietly about nothing urgent, about small details, about tomorrow in vague terms. These conversations require no resolution. They exist for their own sake. The lamp goes out. Darkness settles like a familiar blanket. Outside, the city murmurs. You allow it to exist without engagement. In bed, the mattress accepts you. You adjust until the alignment is right. That small satisfaction signals safety. The body responds gratefully. Thoughts drift again. They always do. You consider how repetition can create a strange kind of freedom, how predictability reduces fear. You don't analyze further. Sleep doesn't need analysis. Breathing slows. Muscles release. The day loosens its grip. You float again in that gentle in-between space. The house quiet, the routine waiting patiently for morning. You rest, not because you've earned it, but because it's required. And that is enough. Morning arrives again with the same restrained patience. It never announces itself loudly. That would be unnecessary. You wake before the house fully stirs, hovering in that familiar gray space between sleeping and being required to function. You remain still for a few seconds, longer than needed, not out of laziness, but strategy. The body appreciates gentle negotiations. The aches check in right on schedule. You acknowledge them like coworkers you don't particularly like but have learned to coexist with. Shoulders stiff, hips complaining, feet already tired somehow. You accept the report without commentary. There will be no adjustments made. Lily turns over softly. Her breathing shifts rhythm. She opens one eye, then closes it again. That's her version of good morning. You don't speak yet. Words can wait. This quiet belongs to you both. Eventually, you sit up. The floor greets your feet with its usual cold disapproval. This is not personal. It does this to everyone. You step carefully anyway. You've learned respect for surfaces that don't care about your comfort. The washstand performs its duty without surprise. Water, soap, reflection. The face looking back is familiar but distant, like an acquaintance you've known long enough to stop asking questions. You rinse and move on. There's no benefit in lingering. Downstairs, the house begins its low mechanical awakening. The kettle resumes its gentle protest. Footsteps sound from different corners, carefully timed, so no one collides. The building understands coordination better than most people. Breakfast unfolds with minimal ceremony. Cups placed, bread sliced. Someone sighs without explanation. No one asks why. You drink your tea slowly today. It tastes the same as always. This consistency is one of its better qualities. Mrs. Cartwright appears briefly, as she always does. She scans the room with that expression that suggests both approval and disappointment simultaneously. She makes a note. She leaves. This interaction contains all necessary information. The morning stretches open like a long corridor. You fill it with tasks that require just enough attention to quiet the mind. Mending a hem, replacing a button, airing fabric that has absorbed too much of yesterday. You work steadily, without hurry. This pace keeps things intact. Occasionally, you pause, not from fatigue, but habit. You sit by the window again. The street offers its familiar parade. A woman arguing with a delivery boy. Two children inventing a game with no clear rules. An old man standing still for so long you briefly wonder if he's part of the scenery. You observe without judgment. This distance protects you. Thoughts wander as they like. You consider how many lives repeat like this, how routine becomes identity over time. You don't find this frightening. It's oddly reassuring. There's safety in knowing what comes next. Afternoon settles in quietly. The light shifts just enough to be noticed. You return to reading. The same pages again. They no longer inform, they simply accompany. You like that. They don't demand reaction. Someone laughs upstairs. A short laugh. Not particularly happy, not particularly sad, just sound. You register it and let it pass. As evening approaches, you feel the subtle tightening again. The house preparing itself like a body bracing for familiar exertion. You rise without instruction. The ritual begins. Clothing selection is efficient. The dress today is practical. It drapes well. It forgives movement. It doesn't require constant awareness. You appreciate garments that understand their role. You step into it, feel the alignment settle, the performance slipping into place without resistance. Corset, lace, breath adjusted again. You move through the process with practiced neutrality. This is not discomfort, it's accommodation. You've learned the difference. Downstairs, the parlor waits in its carefully constructed neutrality. Lamps positioned just so, light designed to soften truth. Furniture arranged to suggest closeness without obligation. The illusion remains intact. You take your position naturally. This space knows you. Guests arrive steadily tonight. Faces blur together over time, but patterns remain. One nervous, one arrogant, one lonely, one simply bored. You greet them all with the same calibrated presence, warm but not inviting, calm but not intimate. This balance keeps things manageable. A man talks about his wife without realizing he's doing it. You listen without comment. You don't correct him. This is not the place for honesty. It's the place for containment. Another speaks loudly, as if volume might protect him from his own thoughts. You let him exhaust himself. He always does. They all do eventually. Between interactions, you rest in stillness again. hands folded, eyes soft, breath slow. This pause is essential. It prevents saturation. You cannot absorb everything and remain functional. The room fills, then stabilizes. The noise reaches a predictable plateau. You navigate it smoothly. You know where to stand, where to move, when to disappear briefly. This choreography has been rehearsed countless times. Time passes in layers. You don't track it precisely. You don't need to. The body knows when to slow down, when to conserve. You follow its lead. Food appears again. You eat because it's there. You drink tea because it keeps you even. These choices require no emotional investment. They are maintenance, like oiling a hinge. As the night thins, the atmosphere changes. The remaining guests linger longer. They speak slower. They hesitate near the door. You allow them their moment. Then you gently end it. You cannot extend yourself indefinitely. That lesson was learned the hard way. When the final release comes, it's subtle but immediate. The work loosens its grip. You feel lighter, not happy, not relieved, just unburdened. Upstairs again, the familiar climb. The private room waits. Lily is there, as expected. She looks exhausted in the same quiet way you feel. You exchange a look that communicates shared endurance. Undressing proceeds without urgency. Each garment removed returns something to you: flexibility, breath, space. The corset lasts, as always. You inhale deeply. This breath still feels like permission. You talk softly about nothing important, about small observations, about tomorrow in abstract terms. These conversations don't need direction. They exist to mark the transition. The lamp goes dark. The room settles into shadow. Outside, the city murmurs its endless story. You don't participate the night. You let it continue without you. In bed, you adjust until everything aligns. That familiar comfort signals safety. The body responds immediately, grateful. Thoughts drift again. They always do. You consider how survival often looks unremarkable from the outside, how endurance rarely announces itself. You don't pursue the thought. Sleep is already approaching. Breathing slows. Muscles release. The day loosens its hold once more. You float in the gentle space between awareness and rest. The house quiet, the routine waiting patiently. You rest, and for now, that is all that's required. The morning returns without enthusiasm. It never brings announcements or apologies. It simply resumes. You wake in the same shallow gray light, that thin slice of consciousness where the body hasn't yet remembered its obligations. You stay there for a moment longer than usual, not resisting the day, just delaying its paperwork. The aches are punctual. They always are. Shoulders first, then hips. Then that dull awareness in the feet that suggests they've already lived a full shift without you. You acknowledge each sensation like a roll call. No one is dismissed. Lily shifts beside you. Her breath changes tempo. She sighs once, quietly. That sigh contains everything she thinks about mornings. You don't comment. Some truths don't require discussion. Eventually, you sit up. The floor delivers its standard chill. You've stopped reacting to it. Reaction implies surprise. This is not surprising. The washstand waits faithfully. Water, soap, mirror. The face staring back is neutral, functional. It belongs to you, but not emotionally. You splash water and watch alertness return in stages. This process is inefficient but reliable. Downstairs, The house awakens in fragments. Kettle first, then steps. Then the soft knock of wood on wood as drawers open and close. Everyone knows their timing. The choreography prevents collision, conversation. Breakfast appears. Cups, bread, the familiar smell of tea. You drink it slowly today, not for enjoyment, but calibration. The warmth steadies things internally. You feel the body align around it. Mrs. Cartwright passes through again. She surveys, she notes, she leaves. That note decides more than anyone realizes. No one asks what she writes. You don't need to know. The morning opens up wide again. You fill it carefully, like pouring water into a vessel that cracks if rushed. You mend something small. The needle moves predictably. This predictability is comforting. It obeys physics, not moods. You pause and sit by the window again. This has become ritual now. The street unfolds its daily performance. A horse refuses to move. A man argues with no one in particular. A woman adjusts her hat with unnecessary precision. These scenes are oddly soothing. They confirm that chaos exists elsewhere. Thoughts wander quietly. You consider how many lives depend on repetition, how novelty is often overrated. You don't romanticize this thought, you simply observe it. Afternoon settles without ceremony. The light changes angle. You return to your book, the same section again. You're not trying to finish it. The book isn't going anywhere. Neither are you. Someone upstairs hums again. The tune is different today. You note the change without curiosity. Some things are allowed to vary. As evening approaches, you feel the shift before the clock confirms it. The house tightens again, energy redirected, postures adjust. You rise and begin preparations automatically. The dress today is heavier. It holds its shape well. It doesn't cling. You prefer this. It creates a small buffer between you and everything else. You step into it and feel the familiar settling, the roll fitting over you like a well worn glove. Corset, lace, breath adjusted again. You don't resent this anymore. Resentment wastes energy. You choose cooperation instead. Downstairs, the parlor waits unchanged. Lamps positioned, furniture aligned. The illusion remains carefully neutral. You take your place. The room accommodates you as naturally as furniture does. Guests arrive at a steady pace tonight. No rush, no lull. You greet them with the same measured warmth. You don't differentiate unless required. They don't want individuality. They want consistency. One man speaks about politics with misplaced confidence. You listen without engagement. You offer neutral sounds of acknowledgement. He leaves satisfied. This costs you nothing. Another confesses loneliness as if it were a secret. You receive it gently. You don't attempt to fix it. Fixing implies responsibility. You provide space instead. Between interactions, you return to stillness, hands folded, eyes relaxed, breath slow. This pause keeps you intact. It prevents the evening from becoming adhesive. The room fills, then stabilizes again. The noise reaches its usual plateau. You move through it with minimal effort. You know the paths, where to stand, where to disappear briefly, when to reappear. This is expertise earned through repetition. Time layers itself quietly. You stop tracking it precisely. You rely on internal cues instead. The body knows when to slow down. You listen. Food appears again. You eat because it's necessary. You drink tea because it prevents edges from forming. These actions are maintenance. They don't require intention. As the night thins, the remaining guests linger longer. They hesitate. They speak slower. You allow them a moment. Then you close the interaction gently. You cannot extend endlessly. This boundary keeps you functional. When the work releases you, It does so subtly. The tension drains out in stages: shoulders, jaw, breath. You don't celebrate. Release is quiet here. Upstairs again. The familiar climb. The private room welcomes you. Lily is already there. She looks tired in a way that mirrors your own. That symmetry remains comforting. Undressing is methodical. Each garment removed returns something small. Mobility, breath, space, the course at last, as always. You inhale fully. This breath still feels significant. It marks the line between roles. You speak softly about small things, about nothing urgent, about tomorrow in vague terms. These conversations don't need resolution. They serve as transition. The lamp goes out. Darkness settles immediately. Outside, the city continues its low murmur. You let it exist without you tonight. In bed, you adjust until everything aligns. That familiar comfort signals safety. The body responds without hesitation. Thoughts drift again. They always do. You consider how endurance often looks invisible from the outside, how survival rarely announces itself. You don't chase the thought. Sleep is already approaching. Breathing slows. Muscles release. The day loosens its hold once more. You float in that familiar in between space, the house quiet, the routine waiting patiently for morning. You rest, and you do not reach for an ending. The next morning arrives the same way all the others do, not with intention, but with persistence. You surface slowly, as if pulled upward by habit rather than desire. The light is thinner today, clouded, muted. It filters through the window like it's unsure whether it should bother. You appreciate that restraint. You stay still for a while. The body checks in again. The report is familiar. Nothing catastrophic, nothing improved, everything present. You accept the inventory without negotiation. There is no appeal process. Lily breathes softly beside you. She turns once, then stills. She exists in that narrow space between sleeping and obligation. You let her remain there a moment longer. There is no prize for waking first. When you finally sit up, the floor greets you with the same cold certainty. You've stopped interpreting this as hostility. It's just honesty. The house has never pretended to be comfortable. It provides shelter, not warmth. At the washstand, you move through the ritual without thought. Water, soap, reflection. The face looking back appears composed enough. No obvious damage. You rinse and move on. There's no reason to linger on things that won't change. Downstairs, the house reassembles itself. The kettle resumes its low argument with heat. Footsteps sound from different directions, carefully spaced. The building understands timing better than people ever do. Breakfast is quiet today, more than usual. Someone yawns and doesn't apologize. You drink your tea slowly, letting the warmth settle where it's needed. This is less about enjoyment and more about alignment. Mrs. Cartwright passes through again. She observes, she notes, she leaves. The balance of the house shifts subtly around her absence. No one comments. This is how authority maintains itself, by not announcing. The morning stretches open again. You fill it deliberately. Small tasks first, the ones that produce visible results: a tear mended, a clasp replaced. These acts reassure you that effort can still be traced to outcome. You pause by the window as you always do. The street performs its daily improvisation. A cart stalls. A man gestures dramatically to no one. A child drops something and retrieves it with great seriousness. These small dramas are oddly soothing. They resolve themselves quickly. Your thoughts wander lazily. You consider how repetition dulls sharp emotions, how predictability can act like a sedative. You don't judge this, you simply note it. Afternoon arrives quietly. The light shifts again. You return to your book. The same pages, the same lines. They've become background noise for your thoughts. You don't mind. This book asks nothing of you. Someone upstairs hums again. The tune is unfamiliar. You don't try to identify it. Some things are allowed to remain undefined. As evening approaches, you feel the familiar tightening, the house adjusting itself for use. You rise automatically. The preparation begins without instruction. The dress today is simple. It doesn't demand attention. It behaves. You prefer this kind of cooperation. You step into it and feel the alignment happen. The roll settles over you without friction. Corset, lace, breath adjusted again. You move through the process with calm efficiency. This is not suffering, it's accommodation. You've learned the difference through repetition. Downstairs, the parlor waits unchanged. Lamps positioned to soften everything. Furniture arranged to suggest intimacy without commitment. The illusion remains intact. You take your place naturally. The room accepts you as part of its structure. Guests arrive steadily tonight, not hurried, not sparse. You greet them with the same measured presence. You don't overextend, they don't require it. One man speaks about regrets as if listing inventory. You listen without interruption. You offer no solutions. This is not a problem solving environment, it's a holding space. Another speaks loudly about successes that feel rehearsed. You respond with gentle neutrality. He leaves satisfied. This interaction costs you nothing. Between guests, you return to stillness, hands folded, eyes relaxed, breath slow. This pause prevents accumulation. You cannot afford saturation. The room fills and stabilizes again. The noise reaches its usual plateau. You move through it with practiced ease. You know where to stand, where to drift, when to disappear briefly. This knowledge keeps everything smooth. Time layers itself quietly. You stop counting. You trust the body to signal when adjustments are needed. It rarely fails. Food appears again. You eat because the body requires it. You drink tea because it keeps the edges soft. These actions are maintenance. They don't carry meaning. As the night thins, the remaining guests linger longer. They hesitate. They speak slower. You allow them their moment. Then you close the interaction gently. You cannot carry them beyond the door. When the work releases you, it does so gradually. The tension drains out in stages: shoulders, jaw, breath. You don't celebrate. You simply acknowledge the shift. Upstairs again. The familiar climb. The private room waits. Lily is already there. She looks tired in the same quiet way you feel. That shared exhaustion binds you more than affection ever could. Undressing proceeds methodically. Each garment removed returns something small: mobility, breath, space. The corset lasts. You inhale fully. This breath remains the clearest boundary you have. You talk softly about small observations, about nothing urgent, about tomorrow in abstract terms. These conversations are unstructured. They exist only to mark transition. The lamp goes out. Darkness settles immediately. Outside, the city continues its low murmur. You allow it to exist without your involvement. In bed, you adjust until everything aligns. That familiar comfort signals safety. The body responds with gratitude. Thoughts drift again. They always do. You consider how stability can be built from repetition, how identity survives performance when boundaries are respected. You don't pursue the thought. Sleep is already close. Breathing slows. Muscles release. The day loosens its grip. You float again in that in between space, the house quiet, the routine waiting patiently. The next day follows without deviation. You wake, you inventory, you rise. The floor remains cold. The mirror remains honest. The house resumes its hum without consulting you. Breakfast tastes the same. You drink the tea anyway. It performs its function. The morning fills itself with maintenance again. You mend, you replace, you tidy. These tasks require just enough focus to quiet unnecessary thoughts. At the window, the street repeats its patterns, different faces, same motions. You observe without attachment. This distance preserves energy. Afternoon settles. You read again. The pages offer familiarity rather than insight. You accept this without disappointment. As evening approaches, the shift returns. You prepare. You dress. You align. You adjust breath. You descend. The parlor waits. Guests arrive. You listen. You respond. You contain. You redirect. This rhythm has become second nature. Between interactions, you pause, you breathe, you remain intact. The night thins. You release the last guests. You climb the stairs. You undress. You breathe fully again. In bed, you settle. You float. You let the day dissolve. And somewhere beneath all of this repetition, there's a quiet understanding that this routine is not accidental. It is constructed carefully, maintained daily, not because it is ideal, but because it works. And for now, working is enough. The following days do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, stacked one on top of another like folded linens. You unfold them as needed. No rush, no ceremony. The body adjusts before the mind bothers to comment. The deficiency feels earned. Morning repeats. You wake before the house fully exhales. The light is gray again. It often is. You sit up slowly, allowing gravity to negotiate terms. The floor remains cold. It always will. You accept it as part of the contract. At the washstand, the water stinks just enough to keep you present. You welcome that. It's easier than thinking. Reflection confirmed. You move on. Downstairs, the routine assembles itself. Breakfast noises subdued. The clink of cups, the scrape of chairs. Someone coughs twice and then stops. No one reacts. These sounds are familiar enough to be ignored. You drink your tea slowly. The warmth travels predictably. You eat because hunger is inconvenient later. You do not linger at the table. This space belongs to function, not comfort. Morning work fills the hours again. Thread through fabric, needle through cloth. You repair things that will be used and worn and damaged again. There's something honest about that cycle. It doesn't pretend permanence. Your hands move without instruction. They remember faster than your thoughts ever could. This frees your mind to wander safely. You think about nothing in particular. You let memories drift past without anchoring. They lose power when not examined. The window offers its daily exhibit. The street performs its usual theater. A woman argues with a vendor. A horse resists direction. A man laughs too loudly at something unremarkable. You observe without investment. This detachment feels like a skill you learned deliberately. Afternoon presses in quietly. The light dulls further. You return to your book. The pages are worn now. You know where the creases are. You read anyway. The words provide texture more than meaning. That is enough. A bell rings somewhere distant. You don't investigate. There are sounds in the city that do not require response. You've learned which ones matter. As the day tips toward evening, you feel the shift again. The body anticipates before the clock confirms. You rise automatically. The preparation resumes. Clothing today is chosen without debate. The fabric behaves. The color flatters enough. You do not require admiration. You require efficiency. The corset tightens just enough. You test your breath. You adjust. You move on. Hair arranged. Pins secure. Cosmetics minimal. The effect acceptable. You do not search for perfection. Perfection invites scrutiny. Downstairs, the parlor receives you. The lamps glow obligingly. The furniture waits. The air smells faintly of polish and heat and something sweet. You take your place as if you were always meant to be there. The first guests arrive earlier than expected. The house adjusts. The energy rises slightly. You respond without effort. One man speaks at length about his profession. You listen attentively. You offer gentle affirmations. He relaxes visibly. He needed an audience more than anything else. You provide it briefly and then redirect. Another arrives nervous. He avoids eye contact at first. You soften your posture. You reduce pressure. He relaxes gradually. These interactions follow recognizable patterns. You adapt without strain. Between visits, you return to stillness. Hands folded, breath even. You do not review conversations. They are complete once finished. You refuse to carry residue. The evening builds and settles into its usual rhythm. No surprises, no disruptions. The house runs smoothly. This is success in this context. You recognize it without celebration. Later, a guest lingers longer than necessary. You manage the transition gently. You do not rush him. You do not extend him either. The boundary holds. He leaves satisfied. You remain intact. When the night finally loosens, you feel the release in stages. You welcome it without dramatics. Upstairs again, the familiar scent. The private room receives you. Lily sits by the window. She looks tired, but steady. You exchange a glance. No words required. Undressing proceeds carefully. The removal of layers restores range of motion gradually. You savor the return of full breath when the corset comes away. This remains the clearest relief of the day. You speak quietly about trivial observations, about nothing that requires resolution. These conversations serve as decompression. You allow them to drift and fade naturally. The lamp dims. Darkness arrives promptly. The city murmurs beyond the walls. You do not engage. Sleep approaches without resistance. Your body accepts it readily. You allow yourself to float again into that neutral space between thought and rest. The days continue in this manner, each one familiar, each one slightly altered by small details, a different guest, a different tone of light, a different ache that resolves itself by morning. You stop measuring time precisely. The calendar matters less than the rhythm. You trust the pattern. You understand it now. Occasionally, you notice a flicker of restlessness. It appears briefly, then dissolves. You do not chase it. You have learned that curiosity requires energy you choose to conserve. The house continues to function. The routines hold. Mrs. Cartwright remains observant. She intervenes rarely. When she does, it is efficient. You respect that economy. The other women shift around you. Some leave, some arrive. You register the changes without commentary. This environment is transient by design. Your role remains consistent. You perform it with quiet competence. This reliability has its own reward. It minimizes friction. Morning after morning, you wake. The floor greets you. The mirror confirms continuity. The tea warms you. The work fills the hours. Evening after evening, you dress, you align, You descend. The parlor accepts you. Guests arrive. You listen. You respond. You maintain boundaries. You release them when appropriate. Night after night, you undress. You breathe fully. You settle. You sleep. This repetition builds a strange kind of stability, not rooted in permanence, but in predictability. You find comfort there. There are moments when you consider alternatives. They pass quickly. You do not indulge speculation. This life demands presence, not projection. You focus instead on small efficiencies, how to move with less strain, how to listen without absorbing, how to end conversations cleanly. These refinements matter. They preserve you. The seasons shift gradually. You notice it in the light first, then in the temperature. The house adjusts accordingly. Fires burn longer. Curtains stay drawn. You add layers without comment. Your body adapts. It always does. You acknowledge its resilience without sentiment. Some nights are quieter, some are busier. You approach them all the same. You do not attach meaning to volume. Occasionally, a guest asks personal questions. You deflect gently. You provide just enough truth to satisfy curiosity without opening anything vulnerable. This balance is practiced. It works. You learn to recognize when silence is more valuable than speech. You deploy it strategically. Between guests, you rest in stillness. You let your mind drift just enough to recover. You remain aware without tension. As the weeks stretch onward, this pattern deepens. You no longer anticipate change. You simply accommodate it when it arrives. The house continues its low hum. The city continues its endless motion. You exist comfortably within both, without fully belonging to either. At night, as you lie in the quiet, you feel the day dissolve cleanly. You do not replay events. You do not rehearse tomorrow. You rest in the present moment. This is enough. The routine holds. You hold yourself within it, steady, unremarkable, functional, and for now, that is exactly what you need. The weeks continue to layer themselves quietly. No marker announces their passing. You recognize time only by subtle adjustments. The way the light enters the room, the length of the evenings, the slight shift in the house's rhythm. You adapt without comment. This adaptation has become instinct. Morning arrives again. You wake before the sound of movement. The body checks in as usual. Nothing new, nothing alarming. You accept the report and rise. The floor remains cold. This consistency has become reassuring. At the washstand, you complete the ritual. Water, soap, reflection, no analysis. You dry your hands and move on. Downstairs, the kitchen breathes awake. Kettle, murmurs, chairs, shifting, positions. You take your place without ceremony. Tea warms your hands first, then settles deeper. You eat efficiently. The food is sufficient. That is all it needs to be. Work resumes. The needle finds fabric. Thread follows through without resistance. The repetition steadies you. There's comfort in predictable resistance. You fix what can be fixed. You leave the rest alone. Outside, the street performs again. You watch the same patterns repeat with minor variations. A different argument, the same gestures. You note how easily chaos organizes itself when left alone. The afternoon passes gently. You read again. The pages feel softer now. You suspect you could recite them if required. You hope you never are. As evening approaches, you feel the familiar internal shift. The house signals readiness. You rise. The preparation begins. Today's dress is slightly heavier. You notice the difference immediately. The weight alters your posture just enough. You adjust without effort. This awareness has sharpened over time. Corset adjusted, breath tested, hair pinned securely. You choose minimal adornment. You've learned that subtlety outlasts display. The parlor receives you as usual. The lamps glow, the air warms, the furniture holds its places patiently. You settle in naturally. Guests arrive steadily. The first speaks too quickly. You slow the interaction deliberately. He follows your pace gratefully. This control is quiet but effective. Another guest is subdued. You lift his mood gently without forcing it. He responds just enough. This is sufficient. You do not aim for transformation, you aim for comfort. Between interactions, you rest again. The pause restores balance. You focus on breath, on contact with the chair. This small grounding keeps you steady. The evening unfolds without incident. This smoothness is not accidental. It is the result of constant minor adjustments. You recognize the effort without resentment. Later, a guest overstays his welcome slightly. You manage the exit with grace. You smile. You disengage. You guide him toward conclusion. He leaves satisfied. You remain whole. When the night releases its grip, you feel the gradual easing. Shoulders soften, jaw relaxes. You move upstairs without haste. In your room, Lily waits. She appears thoughtful. You exchange a few quiet words. Neither of you presses further. These exchanges are enough. Undressing becomes a ritual of restoration. Each garment removed returns something essential. When the corset loosens, you breathe fully again. This remains the clearest pleasure of the day. Darkness settles. The city hums beyond reach. You allow yourself to rest. The following morning repeats itself with subtle variation. The light is sharper today. You squint briefly, then adjust. You rise. The floor greets you. The mirror confirms continuity. Breakfast proceeds quietly. Someone laughs briefly at something unremarkable. You note the sound and move on. The morning work continues. You repair, you replace, you tidy. The hands move confidently. This competence is grounding. You pause by the window again. The street performs. The patterns hold. You observe without investment. Afternoon drifts in. You read. The words blur pleasantly. You allow your mind to wander safely. Evening arrives again. You prepare. You dress. You align. You descend. The parlor fills. The interactions flow. You listen. You respond. You guide conversations gently. You maintain boundaries effortlessly now. One guest speaks of ambition. You nod appropriately. You encourage without validating excess. He leaves feeling affirmed. This costs you nothing. Another seeks reassurance. You provide it carefully. You do not promise. You simply listen. This is often enough. Between guests, you return to stillness. The chair supports you. The room hums. You breathe evenly. The night resolves itself. You release the final guests. You climb the stairs. You undress. You breathe fully. You rest. Days accumulate in this fashion. They blur together without losing coherence. You stop expecting deviation. You accept variation when it appears. The house continues its steady operation. Mrs. Cartwright remains watchful. She intervenes sparingly. When she does, it is precise. You respect this efficiency. The women around you shift positions. Some stay, some leave. You register these changes without attachment. This environment is not designed for permanence. Your role remains stable. You perform it with quiet consistency. This reliability has become your signature. Morning routines hold. Evening rituals repeat. You exist comfortably within this structure. Occasionally, a thought drifts through. What if? This question fades quickly. You do not pursue it. You have learned the cost of unnecessary speculation. Instead, you refine technique, you improve efficiency, you reduce waste, you learn how to disengage cleanly. These skills preserve energy. They matter. The seasons continue their gradual transition. You notice the colder air first. The house compensates. Fires burn longer. Curtains stay closed. You add layers without discussion. Your body responds appropriately. You note minor aches and address them efficiently. You do not dramatize discomfort. Some nights bring heavier crowds. Some are quieter. You approach them identically. Volume does not dictate value. A guest asks personal questions again. You deflect smoothly. You offer enough truth to feel real without revealing anything fragile. This balance has become second nature. Silence proves increasingly useful. You deploy it often. People fill it eagerly. You listen without absorbing. Between guests, you remain still. You let the mind drift lightly without attachment. This rest is essential. As weeks stretch onward, you feel the pattern deepen. You are no longer adjusting, you are maintaining. This distinction matters. The house hums, the city churns. You exist between these forces without friction. At night, you lie quietly. You allow the day to dissolve cleanly. You do not replay conversations. You do not anticipate tomorrow. You rest in the present. This remains sufficient. The routine continues. You continue within it, steady, contained, functional, not remarkable, not fragile. And for now, that balance holds. The days stretch onward without ceremony. You stop counting them precisely. Time becomes texture rather than number. You feel it in your muscles, in the way the house breathes differently as the weeks pass. Morning again. You wake before sound. The habit remains intact. The body reports in. Mild stiffness. Nothing unusual. You accept it and move. The floorboards greet you. The same slight creak beneath your step. You wash. You dress. You descend. Breakfast is quiet. The kettle sings briefly, then settles. You drink slowly. The warmth anchors you. The bread is fresh today. You notice and appreciate it without comment. Work resumes. The needle moves. The fabric yields. The repetition keeps your thoughts smooth. You have learned how not to think while still remaining aware. This balance took time. Outside, the city continues its endless negotiation. You observe without judgment. You no longer wonder where anyone is going. You know everyone believes they must be somewhere important. Afternoon, light shifts. You adjust position accordingly. You stretch briefly, return to task. By late afternoon, the familiar internal preparation begins. Not anxiety, not excitement, just alignment. The body readying itself for another role. You acknowledge the transition without resistance. You dress carefully. The movements are efficient now. You no longer rush. There's no benefit to haste. The mirror reflects continuity. You nod once. That is enough. Downstairs, the parlor hums softly. The lamps glow evenly. The furniture holds quiet memory. You settle into your place. The first guest arrives early. He speaks cautiously. You meet him at his level. You neither lead nor follow. You walk alongside. He relaxes quickly. This is effective. Another arrives with bravado. You soften his edges subtly. You do not challenge. You redirect. The bravado dissolves into something manageable. Between guests, you rest. The chair supports you. You feel the breath deepen. This pause remains essential. You have learned that stillness is not inactivity, it is preparation. Later, a familiar face appears. You recognize the pattern immediately. You adjust expectations accordingly. The interaction proceeds smoothly. You conclude it gently. You feel nothing afterward. This neutrality is earned. The evening continues. You remain present without effort. This presence is no longer forced. It exists naturally. At one point, you notice the fire burning lower. You signal discreetly. It is addressed promptly. You appreciate competence in others. As the night unfolds, you sense the gradual tapering. The energy shifts. The house prepares to close. You follow suit. Upstairs, the quiet greets you. You undress slowly. You breathe fully again. This release never loses its satisfaction. Lily speaks briefly. You answer minimally. You share understanding without elaboration. You both rest. Morning arrives again. Light slightly paler today. You adjust. You rise. You wash. You descend. The rhythm continues. This repetition no longer feels heavy. It feels supportive. Midday passes quietly. You repair a seam. You tidy. You complete small necessary tasks. These visible results provide quiet satisfaction. A letter arrives for someone else. You set it aside. You do not wonder about its contents. You have learned boundaries extend beyond physical space. The afternoon grows colder. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders. You continue working. Evening approaches. You prepare. You dress. You align. The parlor feels moderately tonight. Not crowded. Not empty. You appreciate the balance. Guests arrive spaced comfortably. You guide each interaction smoothly. You remain composed. One guest lingers emotionally. You listen briefly. You redirect gently. You do not absorb. This skill protects you. Between guests, you sit quietly. You feel the weight of the dress. You adjust posture. You breathe steadily. The night ends without complication. You return upstairs. You rest. Days follow days. You note subtle seasonal shifts. The air sharpens slightly. The fires burn longer. You add layers automatically. Your body responds predictably. You address discomfort early. You do not allow it to accumulate. The house maintains its equilibrium. Mrs. Cartwright oversees with consistent authority. You trust her judgment. She trusts your reliability. This mutual understanding requires no discussion. Some women leave quietly, others arrive. You welcome newcomers politely. You offer guidance when asked. You do not overwhelm. This balance matters. Your own role remains steady. You are neither central nor invisible. This middle position suits you. Morning routines persist. You rise. You wash. You dress. You descend. Meals remain simple. They sustain without indulgence. You appreciate this clarity. Afternoons pass with quiet industry. You read occasionally. You work mostly. You conserve energy deliberately. Evenings repeat. You prepare. You perform. You conclude. You restore. You begin noticing how little emotional residue remains. This is not numbness, it is efficiency. You give what is required, you keep the rest. Silence becomes easier. You no longer feel compelled to fill it. This restraint gives you control. Occasionally, a guest remarks on your calm. You acknowledge lightly. You do not explain. This calm is not a trick. It is practiced. Between guests, you anchor yourself in physical sensation. The chair beneath you, the warmth of the room, the steady rhythm of breath. This grounding prevents drift. The night resolves. You climb the stairs. You undress. You rest. Weeks accumulate quietly. You stop marking them entirely. The weather turns decisively colder. The house responds. Fires attended more carefully. Windows sealed more tightly. You wear thicker stockings. You move slightly slower. You adapt. Your body adjusts. You notice minor fatigue earlier. You respond with rest. You do not push unnecessarily. You have learned limits are not weaknesses. Some evenings bring heavier work. You manage pacing accordingly. You do not rush. You do not linger unnecessarily. You maintain consistency. Late nights end quietly. You retreat upstairs. You rest deeply. The storm outside provides rhythm. You sleep easily. Mornings follow with muted light. You wake rested. You rise. You resume. The routine holds. You realize you no longer anticipate weekends or holidays. They pass with minimal distinction. This does not bother you. The stability is preferable. Afternoons bring occasional laughter in the kitchen. You participate briefly. You do not linger. This balance preserves energy. Evenings unfold predictably. You prepare. You perform. You conclude. One guest grows sentimental. You redirect with kindness. You maintain distance. He leaves grateful. You remain unaffected. Another arrives hurried. You slow him deliberately. He settles. You guide him toward conclusion. He leaves calmer. This feels efficient. Some evenings bring heavier demand. You pace yourself accordingly. You do not rush. You do not linger. You maintain equilibrium. Late nights end quietly. You retreat upstairs. You sleep without dreaming. Morning returns. You rise, refreshed enough. You continue. The routine holds. You find comfort in its reliability. Occasionally, a thought surfaces. What if things were different? You acknowledge it briefly, then you let it pass. You do not chase hypotheticals. Instead, you focus on refinement. You improve timing. You reduce wasted motion. You conserve energy. These adjustments matter. Silence becomes a tool. You use it often. People fill it eagerly. You listen without absorbing. This restraint preserves you. Between guests, you ground yourself in physical sensation, the chair, the warmth, the steady breath. This practice keeps you centered. The night ends, you rest. Weeks pass unnoticed. You stop tracking them entirely. The house remains steady. Mrs. Cartwright oversees with quiet authority. You respect her efficiency. She values your consistency. This mutual understanding requires no words. Women come and go. You acknowledge arrivals. You note departures. You do not cling. This environment teaches impermanence. Your own role remains stable. You are reliable. This reliability has become your identity here. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple. They sustain you adequately. You appreciate this clarity. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You repair, you tidy, you maintain order. This visible structure comforts you. Evenings repeat. You prepare, you perform, you conclude, you restore. You notice how little emotional residue remains. This is not emptiness, it is discipline. You give what is required. You keep the rest intact. Occasionally, a guest remarks on your composure. You smile lightly. You do not explain. This calm is earned, not innate. Between guests, you sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest is essential. The night concludes. You ascend. You undress. You breathe. You sleep. The seasons continue their gradual shift. You feel it in the air, in your joints, in the rhythm of the house. You adjust without comment. The world outside remains noisy. You hear it distantly. You do not engage. Your life occupies a narrow channel. You navigate it skillfully. This competence brings peace. Morning again, you wake before sound. You rise, you resume. The kettle sings, the tea warms, you eat, you begin. The cycle continues unbroken. You exist comfortably within it, steady, contained, attentive, unremarkable, and for now, balanced. The rhythm persists without resistance. It has become something you inhabit rather than follow. Morning arrives again. You wake before sound. The body reports in, cool air, slight stiffness, readiness beneath it. You accept this and rise. The floor meets your feet. The sensation grounds you. You wash your face. The water's colder now. You blink once and continue. You dress carefully, layer by layer. The movements are unhurried. Downstairs, the kitchen breathes awake. The kettle waits, as always. You fill it, set it to heat. You listen to the low domestic sounds that signal another functional day. Tea warms your hands first, then your chest. You eat steadily. The food is simple. It does its job. You do not ask more of it. Work resumes. The needle slips through fabric. Thread follows obediently. You guide without force. The repetition steadies your mind. You have learned how to let thoughts drift without attaching to any of them. Outside, the street performs its familiar routine. Carts rattle. Voices rise and fall. You watch without curiosity. The patterns no longer invite speculation. Midday passes quietly. You stretch briefly. Return to task. You notice how efficient your movements have become. There is little waste now. Afternoon light fades earlier each day. You shift closer to the window. You add a shawl. You continue working without comment. By late afternoon, the familiar internal adjustment begins. Not anticipation, not dread, just readiness. The body aligns. The breath slows slightly. You acknowledge the shift and move on. You dress with precision tonight, the fabric heavier, the weight reassuring. You secure each fastening smoothly. The mirror reflects continuity. You accept it without thought. Downstairs, the parlor holds its steady warmth. The lamps glow evenly. The furniture waits patiently. You take your place without ceremony. Guests arrive at a measured pace. The first speaks softly. You match him. You let silence do the work. He settles quickly. This efficiency pleases you. The next arrives restless. You slow your gestures deliberately. He mirrors you without realizing it. This dynamic remains reliable. Between interactions, you rest fully. The chair supports you. You feel the floor through your shoes. This grounding keeps you centered. Another guest arrives with expectations. You redirect gently. You neither promise nor refuse outright. You guide him toward comfort. He accepts. This balance has become instinctive. The evening unfolds smoothly. You remain present without effort. This presence no longer costs you anything. At one point, you notice the fire has burned low. You signal discreetly. The matter is handled. You appreciate systems that function quietly. As the night progresses, you sense the gradual winding down. The energy softens. The house prepares to close. You follow naturally. Upstairs, you undress slowly. The release of the corset brings a deep breath. You do not rush. This sensation remains honest and satisfying. Lily is already preparing for bed. You exchange a few quiet words. Neither of you elaborates. This shared understanding sustains you both. Morning returns with muted light. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. The routine resumes without friction. You no longer question it, you simply participate. Mid morning brings a small repair. You complete it efficiently. The visible result grounds you. Hours pass quietly. You read briefly. The words blur pleasantly. You return to work without regret. Afternoon cools further. You add another layer. You continue. Evening approaches. You prepare. You dress. You align. You descend. The parlor fills modestly. You appreciate the manageable pace. Guests arrive, spaced comfortably. You guide each interaction smoothly. You remain attentive but detached. One guest seeks reassurance. You provide enough to satisfy without offering anything fragile. This boundary protects you. Between guests, you sit quietly. You breathe evenly. You let the body rest. This pause restores balance. The night resolves. You release the final guest. You ascend. You undress. You sleep deeply. Days follow days. The weather settles into cold. The house adapts. Fires burn longer. Curtains remain drawn. You adjust without discussion. Your body responds predictably. You feel fatigue earlier. You rest when possible. You do not push unnecessarily. You have learned endurance requires restraint. Some evenings bring heavier demand. You pace yourself accordingly. You do not rush. You do not linger. You maintain equilibrium. Late nights conclude quietly. You retreat upstairs. You sleep without dreams. Morning returns. You wake rested enough. You continue. The routine holds. You find comfort in its reliability. Occasionally, a thought surfaces. What if? This question dissolves quickly. You do not pursue it. You have learned speculation costs energy. Instead, you focus on refinement. You adjust timing. You reduce unnecessary motion. You conserve effort. These improvements matter. Silence becomes increasingly useful. You deploy it deliberately. People fill it eagerly. You listen without absorbing. This restraint preserves you. Between guests, you anchor yourself in physical sensation, the chair beneath you, the warmth of the room, the steady rhythm of breath. This practice keeps you centered. The night ends. You rest. Weeks pass without markers. You stop counting entirely. The house remains steady. Mrs. Cartwright oversees with consistent authority. She intervenes rarely. When she does, it is precise. You respect this efficiency. She respects your reliability. This mutual understanding requires no conversation. Women shift in and out. Some leave quietly. Others arrive unsure. You offer guidance when asked. You do not overwhelm. This balance matters. Your own position remains stable. You are dependable. This dependability has become your quiet signature. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple. They sustain you adequately. You appreciate this clarity. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You repair, you tidy, you maintain order. This structure comforts you. Evenings repeat. You prepare, you perform, you conclude, you restore. You notice how little emotional residue remains. This is not emptiness, it is discipline. You give what is required, you keep the rest intact. Occasionally, a guest remarks on your calm. You smile lightly. You do not explain. This calm was practiced into existence. Between guests, you sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest is essential. The night concludes. You ascend. You undress. You breathe. You sleep. The seasons continue their slow progression. You feel it in the air, in your joints, in the rhythm of the house. You adjust without comment. The city outside remains restless. You hear it distantly. You do not engage. Your life flows within a narrow channel. You navigate it with skill. This competence brings peace. Morning again. You wake before sound. You rise. You resume. The kettle sings. The tea warms. You eat. You begin. The cycle continues, uninterrupted. You exist comfortably within it, steady, contained, attentive, unremarkable, and for now, entirely sustainable. The rhythm does not weaken, it settles deeper, becoming less something you notice and more something you're carried by. Morning arrives again. You wake before sound. The body reports in cool air, stiffness already loosening beneath awareness. You accept the information and rise. The floor greets your feet. The sensation is familiar enough to be comforting. You wash your face. The water shocks slightly. You blink once and continue. You dress methodically. Layer follows layer with practiced ease. Downstairs, the kitchen exists in its usual state of quiet readiness. The kettle waits, you fill it, set it to heat. You listen to the low domestic sounds that signal another functional day beginning without ceremony. Tea arrives at the precise moment it always does. You wrap your hands around the cup first. The warmth travels inward. You eat slowly. The food is plain. It sustains. That is sufficient. Work begins again. The needle slips through cloth. The thread follows. The resistance is predictable. You guide it without effort. The repetition steadies your breathing. You let thoughts pass without attaching weight to any of them. Outside, the street performs its endless loop. Carts roll past. Voices rise and fall. You watch without curiosity. The patterns no longer invite interpretation. Midday settles quietly. You stretch briefly, return to task. You notice how little excess movement remains. Every action has been pared down to necessity. Afternoon light shortens. You adjust your position. You pull the shawl closer. You continue working without comment. At some point, you realize how rarely you feel anticipation now. Not because nothing happens, but because everything unfolds within expected parameters. This familiarity reduces friction. Late afternoon brings the internal adjustment. The body prepares without prompting. The posture aligns. The breath shifts subtly. You acknowledge the change and proceed. You dress with the same careful attention tonight. The fabric heavier now, the weight reassuring. You secure each fastening smoothly. The mirror offers continuity. You accept it without thought. The parlor receives you with its steady warmth. The lamps glow evenly. The furniture waits patiently. You take your place as naturally as sitting down. Guests arrive gradually. The first speaks cautiously. You match his pace. You allow silence to soften the space. He relaxes. This efficiency is satisfying. The next arrives restless. You slow your movements deliberately. He follows without realizing it. This dynamic remains dependable. Between interactions, you rest fully. The chair supports you. You feel the floor beneath your feet. This grounding anchors you. Another guest arrives with expectations. You redirect gently. You neither promise nor deny. You guide him toward comfort. He accepts. This balance feels instinctive now. The evening continues smoothly. You remain present without effort. This presence no longer costs you energy. At one point, you notice the fire dipping. You signal discreetly. The matter resolves itself. You appreciate systems that function quietly. As the night advances, you sense the gradual tapering. The energy softens. The house prepares to close. You follow without resistance. Upstairs, you undress slowly. The corset loosens. You inhale deeply. This sensation remains the clearest relief of the day. You do not rush it. Lily is already preparing for bed. You exchange a few quiet words. Neither of you needs explanation. This shared understanding is enough. Morning returns with pale light. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. The routine resumes without friction. You no longer question it. You simply move within it. Mid morning brings a small task. You complete it efficiently. The visible result grounds you in the present. Hours pass quietly. You read briefly. The words drift pleasantly. You return to work without regret. Afternoon cools further. You add another layer. You continue. Evening approaches. You prepare. You dress. You align. You descend. The parlor fills modestly tonight. You appreciate the manageable rhythm. Guests arrive spaced comfortably. You guide each interaction smoothly. You remain attentive without investment. One guest seeks reassurance. You provide just enough. You keep the boundary intact. This protects you. Between guests, you sit quietly. You breathe evenly. You let the body rest. This pause restores balance. The night resolves. You release the final guest. You ascend. You undress. You sleep deeply. Days continue to accumulate without markers. You stop distinguishing one from another. This does not bother you. It simplifies things. The weather settles firmly into cold. The house adapts. Fires burn longer. Windows stay sealed. You adjust layers automatically. Your body responds predictably. You feel fatigue earlier. You rest when possible. You do not force endurance. You have learned restraint preserves longevity. Some evenings demand more. You pace yourself accordingly. You neither rush nor linger. You maintain equilibrium. Late nights end quietly. You retreat upstairs. You sleep without interruption. Morning returns. You wake rested enough. You resume. The routine holds. You find reassurance in its stability. Occasionally, a thought surfaces. What if? This question dissolves quickly. You do not pursue it. You have learned speculation consumes energy without reward. Instead, you refine technique. You adjust timing. You eliminate unnecessary motion. You conserve effort. These improvements compound quietly. Silence becomes an increasingly useful tool. You employ it deliberately. People fill it eagerly. You listen without absorbing. This restraint keeps you intact. Between guests, you anchor yourself in physical sensation, the chair, the warmth, the steady rhythm of breath. This practice prevents drift. The night ends. You rest. Weeks slide past unnoticed. You stop tracking them entirely. The house maintains its equilibrium. Mrs. Cartwright oversees with consistent authority. She intervenes rarely. When she does, it is precise. You respect her efficiency. She values your reliability. This understanding requires no discussion. Women come and go. Some leave quietly. Others arrive uncertain. You offer guidance when asked. You do not overwhelm. This balance maintains harmony. Your own position remains unchanged. You are dependable. This dependability has become your quiet identity here. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple. They sustain adequately. You appreciate this clarity. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You repair, you tidy, you maintain order. This visible structure comforts you. Evenings repeat. You prepare, you perform, you conclude, you restore. You notice how little emotional residue lingers. This is not emptiness, it is discipline. You give what is required, you retain the rest. Occasionally, a guest comments on your calm. You smile lightly, you do not explain. This calm was cultivated deliberately. Between guests, you sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest is essential. The night concludes. You ascend, you undress, you breathe, you sleep. The seasons continue their slow progression. You feel it in the air, in your joints, in the rhythm of the house. You adjust without comment. The city outside remains restless. You hear it distantly. You do not engage. Your life flows within a narrow channel. You navigate it with skill. This competence brings a quiet peace. Morning again. You wake before sound. You rise. You resume. The kettle sings. The tea warms. You eat. You begin. The cycle continues without interruption. You exist comfortably within it, steady, contained, attentive, unremarkable, and for now, balanced and intact. The rhythm continues without asking permission. It is fully settled into the background of your awareness, like a clock you only notice when it stops. Morning arrives again. You wake before sound. The body reports quietly. Cool air, a faint ache in the shoulders that loosens as you move. You rise without commentary. The floor is cold today. You register it. You move on. You wash your face. The water feels sharper now. The season has advanced. You accept this information. You dress carefully, layer by layer. The motions require no thought. Downstairs, the kitchen remains unchanged. The kettle waits patiently. You fill it, set it on the flame. You listen to the familiar sounds as heat builds. Tea arrives. You hold the cup. The warmth spreads predictably. You eat slowly. The food performs its task. You do not linger over flavor. It is not required. Work resumes. The needle finds its path. The thread follows obediently. The fabric responds exactly as expected. You guide with minimal pressure. This efficiency is satisfying in a quiet way. Outside, the street continues its endless loop. Wheels over stone, muffled voices. You observe without curiosity. The patterns have long since revealed themselves. Midday passes unnoticed. You stretch briefly, return to work. You notice how little tension remains in your movements. Every action is now calibrated. The light shifts. You adjust position. You draw the shawl closer. You continue without interruption. At some point, you realize the days no longer feel long or short. They simply unfold. This neutrality is restful. Late afternoon brings the internal alignment again. The body prepares instinctively, the breath slows, the posture straightens. You acknowledge the shift and continue dressing preparations. The evening garments feel heavier now. The added weight grounds you. You secure each fastening smoothly. The mirror reflects consistency. You do not linger. Downstairs, the parlor glows softly. The lamps cast even light. The furniture holds warmth. You take your place without ceremony. Guests arrive in steady intervals. The first speaks softly. You mirror him. You allow silence to stretch comfortably. He settles. This outcome remains reliable. The next arrives uncertain. You slow your movements. He follows unconsciously. This dynamic continues to work. Between interactions, you rest fully. The chair supports you. You notice the solidness beneath your feet. This grounding keeps you present. Another guest arrives with expectations. You redirect gently. You neither promise nor deny. You guide him toward ease. He accepts. This balance remains precise. The evening flows smoothly. You remain attentive without strain. This presence has become effortless. You notice the fire again, dipping lower. You signal discreetly. The system responds. You appreciate how little attention this requires now. As the night progresses, the energy softens. The house prepares itself to close. You move with it naturally. Upstairs, you undress slowly. The release of pressure brings a deep breath. This sensation remains one of the few moments you consciously notice. You allow it fully. Lily finishes nearby. You exchange a few quiet words. They're practical. They're sufficient. Morning returns pale and muted. You rise. You wash. You dress. You descend. The routine resumes seamlessly. You no longer consider alternatives. You simply participate. Mid morning brings a small repair. You complete it efficiently. The visible improvement grounds you. Hours pass quietly. You read briefly. The words blur pleasantly. You return to work without resistance. Afternoon cools further. You add another layer. You continue. Evening approaches. You prepare. You dress. You align. You descend. The parlor fills lightly tonight. You appreciate the reduced pace. Guests arrive, spaced generously. You guide each interaction smoothly. You remain attentive without attachment. One guest seeks reassurance. You provide enough to satisfy without offering excess. This boundary remains intact. Between guests, you sit quietly. You breathe evenly. You allow the body to rest. This pause restores equilibrium. The night resolves. You release the final guest. You ascend, you undress, you sleep deeply. Time continues to accumulate unnoticed. You have stopped marking it entirely. This absence of tracking simplifies everything. The cold deepens. The house responds. Fires burn longer. Curtains stay drawn. You adjust automatically. Your body adapts. You feel fatigue earlier. You rest when possible. You avoid unnecessary exertion. This conservation preserves balance. Some evenings bring heavier demand. You pace yourself accordingly. You neither rush nor linger. You maintain steadiness. Late nights conclude quietly. You retreat upstairs. You sleep without interruption. Morning returns. You wake, rested enough. You resume. The routine holds firm. You take comfort in its predictability. Occasionally, a thought surfaces. What if this question dissolves before it fully forms? You have learned not to feed it. Instead, you focus on refinement. You adjust timing, eliminate waste, conserve motion. These small efficiencies accumulate. Silence becomes an increasingly precise tool. You use it intentionally. People fill it quickly. You listen without absorbing. This keeps you intact. Between guests, you anchor yourself in sensation, the chair beneath you, the warmth of the room, the steady rhythm of breath. This grounding prevents drift. The night ends. You rest. Weeks pass, unnoticed. You do not count them. The house remains stable. Mrs. Cartwright intervenes only when necessary. Her actions are efficient. You respect this. She values your consistency. This mutual understanding requires no discussion. Women cycle through. Some leave quietly. Others arrive uncertain. You offer guidance when asked. You do not overwhelm. This restraint maintains order. Your position remains unchanged. You are reliable. This reliability has become your defining trait here. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple. They nourish adequately. You appreciate the lack of complication. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You repair, you tidy, you maintain order. This visible structure is reassuring. Evenings repeat. You prepare, you perform, you conclude, you restore. You notice how little emotion lingers after interactions. This is not numbness, it is discipline. You offer what is required. You retain the rest. Occasionally, a guest remarks on your composure. You smile faintly. You do not explain. This calm was built gradually. Between guests, you sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest remains essential. The night concludes. You ascend. You undress. You breathe. You sleep. The seasons continue shifting. You feel it subtly in the air, in your joints, in the way the house responds. You adapt without comment. The city outside remains restless. You hear it faintly. You do not engage. Your life continues within its narrow channel. You navigate it with skill. This competence brings a steady peace. Morning again. You wake before sound. You rise. You resume. The kettle sings. The tea warms. You eat. You begin. The cycle persists without interruption. You exist comfortably within it, steady, contained, attentive, unremarkable. And as the days continue to pass unnoticed, you realize this steadiness has become its own form of rest. The rhythm remains intact. It no longer announces itself. It simply carries you forward without resistance. Morning arrives again. You wake before sound. The body checks in. Cool air. A mild ache that dissolves as you move. You rise without commentary. The floor feels colder today. You note it and continue. You wash your face. The water bites slightly. The season has shifted again. You accept this information. You dress with the same deliberate economy. Layer by layer, no hesitation. Downstairs, the kitchen holds its familiar stillness. The kettle waits. You fill it, set it to heat. The small sounds of preparation unfold exactly as expected. Tea arrives. You cradle the cup. The warmth travels inward. You eat slowly. The food is uncomplicated. It sustains. You require nothing more. Work begins. The needle slides through fabric. The thread follows. The resistance is predictable. You guide without pressure. This repetition keeps the mind quiet. Outside, the street repeats itself. Carts roll. Voices drift. You observe without curiosity. The patterns no longer invite interpretation. Midday passes unnoticed. You stretch, return to task. You notice how even your breathing has become. There's no excess anywhere. Light shifts again. You adjust position. You pull the shawl closer. You continue without interruption. There's a moment when you realize you cannot recall the last time you rushed. This absence of urgency feels like a quiet victory. Late afternoon arrives. The internal alignment follows automatically. The posture adjusts. The breath slows. You acknowledge it without ceremony. You prepare for the evening with the same care as always. The garments feel heavier now. The weight grounds you. You fasten each piece smoothly. The mirror offers continuity. You do not linger. The parlor receives you warmly. Lamps glow softly. The furniture holds heat. You take your place without thought. Guests arrive at measured intervals. The first speaks cautiously. You match his tone. You let silence soften the space. He relaxes. This outcome remains consistent. The next arrives uncertain. You slow your gestures deliberately. He mirrors you. This dynamic continues to function reliably. Between interactions, you rest fully. The chair supports you. You feel the solidity beneath your feet. This grounding keeps you present. Another guest arrives with expectations. You redirect gently. You neither promise nor refuse outright. You guide him toward ease. He accepts. This balance remains precise. The evening unfolds smoothly. You remain attentive without strain. This presence no longer costs you energy. You notice the fire again, lower than before. You signal discreetly. The matter resolves itself. You appreciate how quietly systems function here. As the night advances, the energy softens. The house prepares to close. You move with it naturally. Upstairs, you undress slowly. The release of pressure brings a deep breath. This sensation remains one of the few moments you consciously savor. You allow it fully. Lily finishes nearby. You exchange a few quiet words. They are practical. They require no elaboration. Morning returns with pale light. You rise. You wash. You dress. You descend. The routine resumes seamlessly. You no longer consider alternatives. You simply move within it. Mid morning brings a minor repair. You complete it efficiently. The visible improvement grounds you in the present. Hours pass quietly. You read briefly. The words blur pleasantly. You return to work without resistance. Afternoon cools further. You add another layer. You continue. Evening approaches. You prepare. You dress. You align. You descend. The parlor fills lightly tonight. You appreciate the slower pace. Guests arrive, spaced generously. You guide each interaction smoothly. You remain attentive without attachment. One guest seeks reassurance. You provide enough to satisfy without offering excess. This boundary remains firm. Between guests, you sit quietly. You breathe evenly. You allow the body to rest. This pause restores balance. The night resolves. You release the final guest. You ascend. You undress. You sleep deeply. Time continues to accumulate unnoticed. You have stopped marking it entirely. This simplifies everything. The cold deepens. The house responds. Fires burn longer. Windows remain sealed. You adjust automatically. Your body adapts. You feel fatigue earlier. You rest when possible. You avoid unnecessary effort. This conservation preserves equilibrium. Some evenings bring heavier demand. You pace yourself accordingly. You neither rush nor linger. You maintain steadiness. Late nights end quietly. You retreat upstairs. You sleep without interruption. Morning returns. You wake rested enough. You resume. The routine holds. You find comfort in its predictability. Occasionally, a thought surfaces. What if? It dissolves before it fully forms. You do not pursue it. You have learned not to feed such questions. Instead, you refine technique. You adjust timing, eliminate waste, conserve motion. These small efficiencies accumulate silently. Silence becomes an increasingly precise tool. You use it deliberately. People fill it quickly. You listen without absorbing. This keeps you intact. Between guests, you anchor yourself in sensation. The chair beneath you, the warmth of the room, the steady rhythm of breath. This grounding prevents drift. The night ends. You rest. Weeks slide past unnoticed. You do not count them. The house remains stable. Mrs. Cartwright intervenes rarely. When she does, it is precise. You respect this efficiency. She values your consistency. This understanding requires no discussion. Women cycle through. Some leave quietly. Others arrive uncertain. You offer guidance when asked. You do not overwhelm. This restraint maintains order. Your own position remains unchanged. You are reliable. This reliability has become your defining feature here. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple, they nourish adequately. You appreciate the lack of complication. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You repair, you tidy, you maintain order. This visible structure is reassuring. Evenings repeat. You prepare, you perform, you conclude, you restore. You notice how little emotional residue lingers. This is not numbness, it is discipline. You give what is required, you keep the rest intact. Occasionally, a guest comments on your composure. You smile faintly, you do not explain. This calm was practiced into existence. Between guests, you sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest remains essential. The night concludes. You ascend, you undress, you breathe, you sleep. The seasons continue shifting. You feel it subtly in the air, in your joints, in the way the house responds. You adapt without comment. The city outside remains restless. You hear it faintly. You do not engage. Your life continues within its narrow channel. You navigate it with skill. This competence brings a steady peace. Morning again, you wake before sound. You rise. You resume. The kettle sings. The tea warms. You eat. You begin. The cycle continues. Unbroken, steady, contained, attentive, unremarkable. And as each day folds quietly into the next, you remain exactly where the rhythm needs you to be. The rhythm holds, it does not tighten or loosen, it simply remains like a current that no longer needs steering. Morning arrives again. You wake before sound. The body reports in quietly. Cool air, a faint stiffness that fades as you move. You rise without hesitation. The floor meets your feet. You register the temperature and move on. You wash your face. The water feels sharper now. The season is edged forward again. You accept this information without comment. You dress carefully, layer after layer. The motions are efficient and familiar. Downstairs, the kitchen waits in the same configuration. The kettle sits where it always does. You fill it, set it to heat. You listen to the small domestic sounds that confirm the day has begun. Tea arrives. You hold the cup. The warmth spreads inward in a predictable way. You eat slowly. The food is plain. It sustains. That is its only obligation. Work resumes. The needle slips through fabric. The thread follows obediently. The resistance is exactly what you expect. You guide with minimal pressure. This repetition keeps the mind quiet. Outside, the street performs its routine. Carts roll over stone. Voices drift and fade. You observe without curiosity. The patterns no longer require interpretation. Midday passes unnoticed. You stretch briefly, return to work. You notice how evenly your breathing continues. There is no rush anywhere. The light shifts again. You adjust your position. You pull the shawl closer. You continue without interruption. There is a brief awareness that time no longer presses against you. This absence of urgency feels natural now. Late afternoon arrives. The internal alignment follows without prompting. The posture adjusts. The breath slows. You acknowledge it and continue preparations. You dress for the evening with the same deliberate care. The garments feel heavier now. The added weight grounds you. You fasten each piece smoothly. The mirror reflects continuity. You do not linger. Downstairs, the parlor receives you with steady warmth. The lamps glow softly. The furniture holds heat. You take your place as naturally as sitting down. Guests arrive at measured intervals. The first speaks quietly. You match his tone. You let silence soften the space. He settles quickly. This outcome remains consistent. The next arrives uncertain. You slow your gestures deliberately. He mirrors you without realizing it. This dynamic continues to function. Between interactions, you rest fully. The chair supports you. You feel the solid floor beneath your feet. This grounding keeps you present. Another guest arrives with expectations. You redirect gently. You neither promise nor refuse. You guide him toward ease. He accepts. This balance remains precise. The evening unfolds smoothly. You remain attentive without strain. This presence has become effortless. You notice the fire dipping again. You signal discreetly. The matter resolves without interruption. You appreciate how little attention this now requires. As the night progresses, the energy softens. The house begins its quiet closing. You move with it naturally. Upstairs, you undress slowly. The release of pressure brings a deep breath. This sensation remains one of the few moments you consciously register. You allow it fully. Lily finishes nearby. You exchange a few quiet words. They are practical. They require no explanation. Morning returns pale and muted. You rise. You wash. You dress. You descend. The routine resumes seamlessly. You no longer consider alternatives. You simply move within it. Mid morning brings a small task. You complete it efficiently. The visible improvement grounds you in the present. Hours pass quietly. You read briefly. The words blur pleasantly. You return to work without resistance. Afternoon cools further. You add another layer. You continue. Evening approaches. You prepare. You dress. You align. You descend. The parlor fills lightly tonight. You appreciate the manageable pace. Guests arrive spaced generously. You guide each interaction smoothly. You remain attentive without attachment. One guest seeks reassurance. You provide enough to satisfy without offering excess. This boundary remains intact. Between guests, you sit quietly. You breathe evenly. You allow the body to rest. This pause restores balance. The night resolves. You release the final guest. You ascend. You undress. You sleep deeply. Time continues to accumulate unnoticed. You have stopped marking it entirely. This simplifies everything. The cold deepens. The house responds. Fires burn longer. Curtains remain drawn. You adjust automatically. Your body adapts. You feel fatigue earlier. You rest when possible. You avoid unnecessary exertion. This conservation preserves equilibrium. Some evenings bring heavier demand. You pace yourself accordingly. You neither rush nor linger. You maintain steadiness. Late nights conclude quietly. You retreat upstairs. You sleep without interruption. Morning returns. You wake rested enough. You resume. The routine holds. You find comfort in its predictability. Occasionally, a thought surfaces. What if it dissolves before it fully forms? You do not pursue it. You have learned not to feed such questions. Instead, you focus on refinement. You adjust timing, eliminate waste, conserve motion. These small efficiencies accumulate silently. Silence becomes an increasingly precise tool. You deploy it deliberately. People fill it eagerly. You listen without absorbing. This keeps you intact. Between guests, you anchor yourself in sensation, the chair beneath you, the warmth of the room, the steady rhythm of breath. This grounding prevents drift. The night ends. You rest. Weeks slide past unnoticed. You do not count them. The house remains stable. Mrs. Cartwright intervenes rarely. When she does, it is precise. You respect this efficiency. She values your consistency. This mutual understanding requires no discussion. Women cycle through. Some leave quietly, others arrive uncertain. You offer guidance when asked. You do not overwhelm. This restraint maintains order. Your own position remains unchanged. You are reliable. This reliability has become your defining feature here. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple. They nourish adequately. You appreciate the lack of complication. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You repair, you tidy, you maintain order. This visible structure is reassuring. Evenings repeat. You prepare, you perform, you conclude, you restore. You notice how little emotional residue lingers. This is not numbness, it is discipline. You give what is required, you keep the rest intact. Occasionally, a guest remarks on your composure. You smile faintly. You do not explain. This calm was cultivated deliberately. Between guests, you sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest remains essential. The night concludes. You ascend. You undress. You breathe. You sleep. The seasons continue shifting. You feel it subtly in the air, in your joints, in the way the house responds. You adapt without comment. The city outside remains restless. You hear it faintly. You do not engage. Your life continues within its narrow channel. You navigate it with skill. This competence brings a steady peace. Morning again. You wake before sound. You rise. You resume. The kettle sings. The tea warms. You eat. You begin. Days follow days without distinction. The repetition no longer feels repetitive. It feels structural, like beams holding everything in place. You notice how rarely surprises occur now. When they do, you absorb them calmly and adjust. The absence of reaction has become a form of strength. Even small disruptions no longer ripple outward. They are contained, handled, and released. This containment preserves energy. You recognize its value. Morning routines remain unchanged. You wake, you wash, you dress, you descend. The kettle, the tea, the quiet beginning, the work. Outside, the city continues to churn. You remain insulated from it by habit and structure. Afternoons pass in steady productivity. You finish tasks. You leave nothing unfinished. This completeness reduces friction. Evenings arrive. You prepare. You align. You descend. The parlor welcomes you with its familiar glow. You take your place without thought. Guests arrive. You receive them. You guide the interaction. You conclude. You release. Between guests, you rest, you breathe, you anchor. Night closes, you retreat, you undress, you sleep. This cycle continues unbroken, not because nothing changes, but because you adapt before disruption takes root. The rhythm does not demand attention, it rewards consistency. And so you continue, carried forward by a structure you no longer question, steady and intact. As the days fold quietly into one another, the morning arrives again without ceremony. You wake before the house stirs. The quiet is complete enough that you can hear your own breathing for a moment. You lie still, not because you are tired, but because there's no urgency to move. The day will wait. It always does. When you rise, the floor is cool and steady beneath your feet. You dress without thinking. The order has been fixed for so long, it no longer requires attention. Water over hands, face rinsed, hair arranged. Simply, the mirror reflects familiarity rather than curiosity. You accept it and turn away. Downstairs, the kettle waits. You fill it, set it to heat. The sound becomes part of the background. You prepare bread. The smell is neutral, comforting in its predictability. You eat slowly. You drink tea at the same measured pace as always. The warmth settles inside you evenly. No rush, no distraction. Work resumes as it always does. You take up the needle, thread follows, fabric yields. You maintain a steady rhythm. The motion occupies your hands and frees the rest of you from unnecessary thought. This balance remains ideal. Outside, the city begins its daily argument. Carts rattle, vendors shout. Somewhere, a disagreement rises and fades. You note it distantly. The noise does not reach inside you. Time moves unnoticed. You pause briefly to stretch your shoulders. You return to work. The repetition continues to smooth the edges of the day. Midday passes quietly. You eat again. Simple food. The purpose remains the same. Sustain and move on. You drink water. You wipe your hands. You resume. The light changes. You register it without comment. You adjust your position slightly. This is enough. Late afternoon brings the familiar internal shift. You begin preparations automatically. There is no resistance. The body recognizes the coming transition before the mind does. You wash again, change clothes, layer by layer. The added weight settles you more deeply into yourself. The corset tightens just enough to remind you where you are. You breathe comfortably. You test movement. It responds as expected. Hair is arranged with practiced efficiency. You secure it firmly. You apply the smallest touch of powder. Rouge blended carefully. The effect is understated. This consistency matters. Scent is last. A light application. You recognize how the fragrance changes as it warms. You step back briefly. The reflection confirms readiness. You do not linger. Downstairs, the parlor glows warmly. The lamps are adjusted. The fire burns steadily. The room feels contained. You take your seat. You allow the chair to support you fully. This grounding remains essential. Others join gradually. Conversation flows in soft currents. You contribute when appropriate. You listen without absorbing. This boundary has been perfected. Dinner passes without incident. The food is filling. The wine warms but does not cloud. You maintain awareness easily. This balance has become second nature. As the evening begins properly, you notice the subtle shift in energy. The house sharpens slightly. You adjust without effort. The first guest arrives. You greet him with calm warmth. You match his pace. You allow him to settle. This happens quickly. The interaction unfolds smoothly. You guide it without forcing. The outcome satisfies him. This is expected. When he leaves, you release the interaction completely. There is no residue. You return to stillness easily. Another arrives, more hesitant. You slow your movements. You soften your voice. He follows instinctively. The room adjusts. This adaptability remains one of your strongest skills. Between guests, you rest fully. You breathe evenly. You feel the solid structure of the house around you. This containment allows true rest even while awake. The night continues in measured intervals. Each interaction differs slightly, but the structure remains unchanged. You respond accordingly. One guest speaks more than usual. You listen patiently. You offer small affirmations. You redirect gently when necessary. He leaves calmer than he arrived. This is a satisfactory outcome. Another requires little conversation. You comply efficiently. You maintain professional warmth. You conclude cleanly. You release him. The hours pass without friction. You do not check the clock. You sense time only through the rhythm of arrivals and departures. As the pace slows, you feel the subtle easing of tension in the house. You mirror it naturally. Eventually, the final guest leaves. You help restore order. You straighten fabric. You adjust the fire. You ensure nothing is left undone. This closure matters. Upstairs, You undress slowly. The release of layers brings a deeper breath. You allow your shoulders to drop fully. This moment remains one of quiet relief. You wash. The water cools your skin. You dry carefully. You settle into bed. The sheets feel clean, familiar. Sleep arrives without delay. Morning returns softly. You wake, rested enough. You rise. You repeat. The routine continues uninterrupted. Day after day folds into the next. You stop distinguishing between them. The sameness no longer feels dull, it feels supportive. Occasionally, new faces appear. Some stay briefly, some longer. You adapt to each without strain. Your consistency remains valued. This position provides stability. You recognize this and preserve it. Small adjustments accumulate over time. You refine timing, you conserve movement, you minimize unnecessary effort. These efficiencies allow you to maintain balance even on longer nights. The house itself becomes an extension of you. You know where every sound originates. You can tell who is moving by the pattern of footsteps. This familiarity keeps you anchored. Morning routines remain unchanged. You wake, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals nourish sufficiently. You appreciate their simplicity. You do not desire excess. Afternoons remain quiet. You repair small items. You organize spaces. This visible order reinforces internal calm. Evenings arrive. You prepare. You perform. You conclude. You restore. You notice how rarely you feel surprised now. When something unexpected occurs, you absorb it smoothly. You adjust and move on. This adaptability preserves energy. The city outside continues to shift. Political murmurs, economic strain, new fashions. You hear fragments. You do not engage. These currents remain distant. Within the house, the rhythm holds firm. You move within it confidently. This confidence is quiet and steady. Morning again, you rise before sound. You begin. The kettle sings. The tea warms. You eat. You work. Time continues to pass without markers. You no longer count days. Weeks slip by unnoticed. This absence of counting frees mental space. Occasionally, a memory surfaces, uninvited. You acknowledge it briefly. You do not dwell. This restraint prevents disturbance. Instead, you return to sensation, the weight of fabric, the warmth of tea, the steady breath. This anchoring remains effective. Evenings follow their pattern. You receive, you guide, you conclude, you rest. Guests comment sometimes on your composure. You smile politely. You offer no explanation. This calm was not accidental. It was cultivated carefully. Between guests, you rest deeply. You sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest sustains you. Night closes. You ascend. You undress. You breathe. You sleep. The seasons continue to turn. You feel it in small ways. The air sharpens. The fire burns longer. You add layers. You adapt seamlessly. Your body adjusts. You pace yourself. You rest when possible. You maintain equilibrium. Some nights stretch longer. You conserve energy. You maintain rhythm. You finish without depletion. Morning returns. You resume. The house remains stable. Mrs. Cartwright intervenes rarely. Her corrections are precise. You respect her authority. She values your reliability. This mutual understanding holds. Women come and go. You offer guidance when asked. You avoid interference. This restraint maintains harmony. Your role remains unchanged. You are steady. This steadiness is your currency. Morning routines persist. You rise, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain plain and sufficient. You appreciate their predictability. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You complete tasks fully. You leave no loose ends. This completeness reduces mental friction. Evenings repeat. You prepare. You align. You descend. The parlor welcomes you with its familiar glow. You take your place naturally. Guests arrive. You receive them. You guide the interaction. You conclude. You release. Between guests, you rest. You breathe. You anchor. Night concludes. You retreat. You undress. You sleep. This cycle continues without disruption, not because nothing changes, but because you adapt before change becomes strain. The rhythm does not demand attention, it rewards consistency. You move forward within it quietly, competently, grounded in repetition and balance, as the days continue to fold into one another without distinction. The morning settles in the same way it always does. You wake before the house makes any claim on you. The quiet feels thick but familiar. You remain still for a few breaths, not because you are tired, but because this pause has become part of the routine. It eases the transition. You rise. The floor receives you steadily. You dress in the established order. No hesitation, no correction. Water over skin. Face cooled. Hair secured. The mirror reflects continuity. You do not interrogate it. You turn away. Downstairs, the kettle waits patiently. You fill it, light the flame. The sound builds slowly. You prepare bread, cut it evenly, eat without haste. The tea warms you in predictable stages. This reliability remains comforting. Work resumes. You take up the needle. The fabric offers the same resistance as yesterday. The thread behaves. You guide it smoothly. This repetition quiets everything unnecessary. Outside, the city begins its restless movement. Wheels over stone, distant voices. The rhythm reaches you faintly. You remain unaffected. Hours pass unnoticed. You adjust posture briefly. You continue. Midday arrives quietly. You eat. You drink. You resume. This rhythm feels self sustaining now. Light shifts. You register it subconsciously. You pull the shawl closer. You continue. Late afternoon triggers the familiar internal alignment. You begin preparing without conscious decision. You wash, change garments, layer carefully. The weight settles reassuringly. The corset supports without constriction. You breathe comfortably. You test movement. It responds perfectly, hair arranged, cosmetics minimal, scent applied lightly. You step back once. The reflection confirms readiness. You do not linger. Downstairs, the parlor glows softly. The lamps cast warm pools of light. The fire burns evenly. You take your place. The chair supports you fully. This grounding remains essential. Others arrive gradually. Their presence fills the room without disruption. Conversation drifts gently. You contribute when appropriate. You listen without attachment. This balance remains precise. Dinner passes quietly. The food sustains. The wine warms but does not blur. You remain clear. As evening deepens, the house sharpens slightly. You adjust seamlessly. The first guest arrives. You greet him warmly. You match his energy. You allow him to settle. The interaction unfolds smoothly. He leaves satisfied. You release the encounter completely. Another guest arrives carrying visible tension. You slow your movements. You soften your voice. He mirrors you unconsciously. This dynamic remains effective. Between guests, you rest fully. You breathe evenly. You feel the solidity of the room around you. This containment allows true rest. The night progresses at a manageable pace. Each interaction varies slightly. You adapt without strain. One guest lingers in conversation. You listen patiently. You offer gentle prompts. You guide the exchange without effort. He departs calmer. This outcome satisfies you. Another prefers efficiency. You comply smoothly. You maintain warmth. You conclude cleanly. You release him. Time passes without friction. You sense the hours through rhythm rather than clocks. As activity tapers, you feel the house exhale. You mirror it naturally. Eventually, the final guest leaves. You help restore order. You straighten surfaces, adjust the fire, ensure nothing remains undone. This closure matters. Upstairs, you undress slowly. The release of layers invites a deeper breath. You allow it fully. You wash. The water cools your skin. You dry carefully. You settle into bed. Sleep arrives quickly. Morning returns gently. You wake, rested enough. You rise. You repeat. Days fold into one another without distinction. You stop marking them. This absence of counting lightens the mind. Occasionally, a new phase disrupts the pattern briefly. You adapt easily. You restore balance quickly. Your reliability remains valued. This position offers stability. You maintain it deliberately. Small efficiencies accumulate. You refine timing. You conserve motion. These adjustments preserve energy. The house feels increasingly like an extension of yourself. You recognize footsteps without looking. You know where every sound originates. This familiarity grounds you. Morning routines remain unchanged. You wake, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals remain simple and sufficient. You appreciate their predictability. Afternoons pass quietly. You mend, you organize, you maintain order. This visible structure reinforces calm. Evenings arrive. You prepare, you align, you descend. The parlor welcomes you with steady warmth. You take your seat naturally. Guests arrive. You receive them. You guide. You conclude. You release. Between guests, you rest. You breathe. You anchor. Night closes. You retreat. You undress. You sleep. Weeks pass unnoticed. The seasons shift gradually. You feel it in the air, in the length of evenings, in the way the house responds. You adapt without comment. Your body adjusts. You pace yourself. You rest when needed. This preservation keeps you balanced. Some nights demand more. You respond efficiently. You finish without depletion. Morning returns. You resume. The city outside continues its restless evolution. New rumors, new anxieties, new distractions. You remain insulated. Within the house, the rhythm holds steady. You move within it confidently. This confidence is quiet. Occasionally, a guest remarks on your composure. You smile politely. You offer no explanation. This calm was earned. Between guests, you rest deeply. You sit quietly. You allow the body to settle. This rest sustains you. Night concludes. You ascend. You undress. You breathe. You sleep. Time continues its unmarked progression. You no longer feel compelled to reflect on it. The present remains sufficient. Memories surface occasionally. You acknowledge them briefly. You return to sensation. This redirection keeps equilibrium intact. Evenings follow their established flow. You receive, you guide, you conclude, you restore. The house remains orderly. Mrs. Cartwright intervenes rarely. When she does, it is precise. You respect her authority. She respects your steadiness. This mutual understanding requires no discussion. New women arrive, uncertain. You offer guidance when asked. You avoid intrusion. This restraint maintains harmony. Your role remains unchanged. You are dependable. This dependability defines your place. Morning routines persist. You wake, you wash, you dress, you descend. Meals nourish adequately. You appreciate their simplicity. Afternoons bring quiet productivity. You complete tasks thoroughly. You leave nothing unresolved. This completeness reduces friction. Evenings repeat. You prepare. You align. You descend. The parlor glows familiarly. You take your place. Guests arrive. You receive. You guide. You conclude. You release. Between guests, you rest, you breathe, you anchor. Night ends, you retreat, you undress, you sleep. The cycle continues unbroken, not because nothing changes, but because you adjust before change becomes strain. The rhythm no longer demands attention, it supports you. You move forward within it steadily, competently, grounded in repetition and balance, as days continue to fold softly into one another without distinction. The rhythm eventually loosens, not dramatically, not with a break or a rupture. It softens, the way water smooths stone without announcing itself. You begin to notice it first in the smallest places. The mornings stretch a little longer. The body asks for an extra breath before rising. The stairs feel steeper, not because they changed, but because you did. Nothing is wrong. This is important to understand. History likes to assign meaning where there's only biology and time. You are not failing. You are simply accumulating days. The house notices before you do. Mrs. Cartwright adjusts schedules quietly. She assigns fewer late evenings. She does not explain. You do not ask. This is how things are done here. With dignity, without spectacle, afternoons grow more valuable. You sit longer. You mend more slowly. You drink tea while it is still hot. You let silence remain unfilled. This becomes a kind of luxury. New girls arrive. You recognize yourself in them immediately. The careful alertness, the controlled posture, the eagerness wrapped tightly in composure. You offer advice when invited. You keep it practical. You tell them where to stand, how to rest between guests, how to save energy. This knowledge feels worth passing on. The evenings change subtly. You still receive customers, but fewer. You are paired deliberately with regulars, with men who prefer conversation, with those who value calm over novelty. You deliver this expertly. This is a skill like any other. It is learned, it is honed, it is real. Between guests, you rest fully. You no longer pretend otherwise. You close your eyes, you breathe, you let the body reset. This permission feels earned. The house continues its operation seamlessly. It always will. Houses like this outlast individuals. They adapt, they replace, they persist. This realization does not disturb you, it reassures you. You were never meant to carry it alone. One evening ends earlier than expected. Mrs. Cartwright dismisses you without ceremony. You accept gratefully. You ascend the stairs slowly. You notice the way your feet know each step by memory. You undress without urgency. The nightdress settles easily. You lie down before exhaustion demands it. Sleep comes gently. Morning follows as it always does, but something is lighter. The pressure to prepare has lessened. You are still useful. You are still valued, but the demand has softened. This is transition, not loss. Days continue. You shift into more supportive roles. You assist. You organize. You maintain order. You ensure smoothness. This contribution matters. You observe more. You speak less. This feels natural. You're no longer proving anything. The house breathes differently now, but the rhythm remains. The fire still burns. The lamps still glow. The voices still murmur. The city still presses in from all sides, unchanged, unconcerned. Occasionally, you step outside longer than necessary. You walk without destination. You watch people hurry past. You feel oddly separate, not lonely, not superior, just adjacent. Evenings still arrive. They always will. But you meet them with less anticipation and less resistance. You simply participate. Eventually, a conversation happens. It is brief. It is practical. Mrs. Cartwright outlines options. You listen. You choose deliberately. There is no drama. There is no regret. This path makes sense. It fits. Your last official evening passes quietly. You perform your role with the same competence as always. You restore the room one final time. You straighten the linens. You extinguish the lamp. You pause briefly, not for nostalgia, just acknowledgement. This chapter closes cleanly. Upstairs, you sleep deeply. Morning comes, you rise. You dress in simpler clothing. You move differently now, unhurried, unencumbered. The house greets you familiarly. You are still part of it, just differently configured. Days follow with new routines. You assist more, you guide more, you rest more. This balance suits you. You still hear laughter from behind closed doors. You still smell perfume and smoke and polished wood. These sensations no longer pull at you, they simply exist. Time continues. You allow it. Occasionally, you think of the girls who came before you, the ones whose names were forgotten, the ones who passed through unnoticed. You understand now that erasure is not the same as meaninglessness. A life does not require documentation to matter. It only requires being lived. Evenings remain calm. You sit by the fire, you listen, you observe. The warmth still reaches you. Eventually, the house settles into its night quiet. You retire early. You sleep well. This becomes the pattern, not an ending, but a resolution. The work finished, the effort complete, the body at rest. History will never record this correctly. It will compress it, mislabel it, ignore it. That is not your concern. You know what this was. You know what it took. You know what it gave. And now you rest, not because you are done being useful, but because usefulness does not have to hurt to be real. The city hums outside. The house holds steady. The bed supports you. The breath slows. Sleep arrives without resistance. And that is enough.